Chapter 1223. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the expressions of the people present changed slightly, but soon they felt relieved. The preparations they made were enough to conceal the perception of ordinary cultivators, so that ordinary cultivators did not know the truth of this formation. But for cultivators at the same level as them, it was obviously not enough. The existence in front of them could make them feel a little unfathomable, so his cultivation realm could not be lower than theirs. It was quite normal for him to be able to see this. It's because of this magical effect that we need to spend so much effort to set it up. Xianwen laughed. As they spoke, they led Luo Fan to the cave mansion at the top of the group. The cave looked like a celestial island, and it was surrounded by boundless clouds and rays of light. There was a platform on it, and on the platform, there was a group of buildings. These buildings were not gorgeous palaces, but rather, they were rather simple. But naturally, they were filled with a kind of magnificent atmosphere, so that anyone who saw them could not help but be in awe. Xianwen and the others landed on the platform with Luo Fan. The moment they landed, 9 buzzing bell chimes rang out. However, this time, the chimes only reverberated in the space-time created by the formation. They did not transmit outside the formation, nor were they heard by other places in the realm of devils. After that, after a short but solemn ceremony, Luo Fan and the others came to a platform that was filled with immortal light, which illuminated almost 1/3 of the world inside the injection room. Then, they sat down according to the host and guest. This platform was made of an unknown material, but it was extremely strong. Its structure was similar to the seal of the Nation Master. Of course, it was not the structure that was connected with a certain law in the law layer and used that law layer to condense some strange existence, but the structure that strengthened its degree of firmness. Because of this structure, the platform itself was so strong that Luo Fan even suspected that it could withstand the fight of existences at the exceptional realm of Tao Masters, of course. This was just a praise for the sturdiness of the platform. However, it did not mean that existences at the exceptional Tao Master level could really fight on this platform. The platform might be able to withstand it, but the world could never withstand the aftermath of such a battle. Sitting on this platform and looking around, one could see 1/3 of the world. The surroundings were filled with a faint mist formed by the condensation of essence energy. Therefore, it made Luo Fan feel as if he was an immortal court high above the 9 heavens, overlooking the billions of mortals in the mortal world. That kind of feeling was truly the most immortal and most suitable for the identity of a cultivator among all the experiences that Luo Fan had ever had in searching for the cave abodes of other fellow Taoists. After sitting down, Xianwen didn't immediately ask Luo Fan why he was here. Instead, he acted as if Luo Fan was an old friend of theirs. They chatted casually. Astronomy, geography, cultivation, all sorts of interesting things on this island, and so on. It caused the atmosphere to become extremely relaxed. Luo Fan didn't feel impatient towards such idle chatter, since he was able to cultivate without moving for a myriad of years. How could he not have this bit of patience? On the contrary, instead, he learned a lot about the current situation in the devil realm from the chatter, and understood many of the rules of the cultivation world in the devil realm. In the cultivation world of the devil realm, the cultivation system of the 54 sages was unique. Every sage of the devil realm had walked on their own path. If the cultivation realms of the 54 sages were to be divided according to their respective cultivation systems, there would be 54 cultivation systems in the devil realm that were completely different from those on Earth and the universe. Obviously, as the supreme and eternal sages, their cultivation systems would naturally affect the entire world. The entire universe would cause this world and the universe to embark on the same path as them. In other words, it would allow all living beings to cultivate their cultivation systems. In this way, if the cultivation realms were really divided according to the cultivation systems of the 54 sages, the cultivation system in the devil realm would never be like this, from the immortal realm to the primordial immortal realm, then to the zenith heaven realm, then to the saint-to-be, and finally to the saint-to-be. There might be all sorts of cultivation systems that Luo Fan didn't even dare to think about, such as directly jumping from a mortal to a primordial immortal, and from a mortal to a sage-to-be. There might even be no intermediate realm of sage-to-be at all, and a cultivation system that directly jumped from the innate zenith heaven to the pseudo-sage level. However, according to Xuanwen's explanation, the 54 saints were benevolent and cared for all living beings. They gathered the powers of the 54 saints and deduced a cultivation system that was related to the 54 saints' paths of cultivation. However, it was more versatile and organized. It was spread throughout the world to guide all living beings in their cultivation. This more versatile and organized cultivation system was what Luo Fan sensed at this time. It was similar to the cultivation system of the cultivators of the Earth universe, which was taken by many cultivators in the Devil realm. Compassionate and cared for all living beings? I think they're all from Earth. And these cultivation systems are just the paths they took before they truly embarked on their own path. When Luo Fan listened to Xianwen and the others talk reverently about how the 54 sages had cared for all living beings, and how they had created a more universal and common cultivation method for all living beings, he couldn't help but criticize them inwardly. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? They wanted to sort out a universal cultivation system, but they ended up with a cultivation system that was almost identical to Earth's. As for the fact that the 54 sages originated from Earth's universe, that was Luo Fan's own bold conjecture. According to legend, the Devil Realm was a world created by the sages of Earth's universe. The reason this world existed was that Earth's universe had encountered a powerful tribulation, and the sages had existed to accommodate the remnant power of the tribulation. Since that was the case, no matter how wonderful and incredible the Devil Realm was, its root cause was Earth's universe. Therefore, the 54 sages that seemed to have existed since the beginning of the world were very likely to have come from Earth's universe. Xianwen and the others had been talking with Luo Fan for several days. What they thought was a mess was almost all the matters of all the cultivators in the world, but after that, they found that Luo Fan was actually listening with great interest, as if he could continue listening like this for several decades without any problems. They finally realized that it was impossible to use such a method to make Luo Fan take the initiative to mention the purpose of coming here. He could only helplessly give up on his original plan. He coughed lightly and said, "I can't stop talking about these things. I almost forgot why fellow Taoists came to visit our sect. What can we do for you?" Luo Fan saw that he was the first to give in and talk about these things, but he didn't feel proud. He smiled faintly and said, "I was too rude. I've been here for so long, but I still haven't clearly stated my purpose for coming." Xuanwu and the others, who were accompanying them, had long become impatient. To them, cultivation was the most important thing. A few days ago, they received a report that a powerful and unfathomable cultivator had come to visit. For the sake of etiquette, they gave up on their own cultivation and came to greet him. Originally, they wanted to walk around for a while before returning to their respective cave abodes to continue cultivating, but they didn't want to drag things out. They actually waited for 7 to 8 days, but they still hadn't gotten to the main topic. This was simply a waste of time, a waste of life, which was really unbearable for them. Xianwen had no choice but to give in and take the initiative to ask about Luo Fan's purpose for coming. The main reason was because of their impatience. When Xuanwu and the others finally heard Xianwen talk about the main topic, they hurriedly put away their impatience and faced him solemnly. After all, they were the elders of Azure Temple. Even if they wholeheartedly cultivated, they knew that Azure Temple was their foundation. As to why Luo Fan came to Azure Temple and what his purpose was, they were still quite concerned. Fellow Taoist, feel free to speak your mind." Xianwen chuckled. "I wonder if fellow Taoists have heard of the world beyond the heavens." Luo Fan asked with a smile, "World beyond the heavens? Of course I've heard of it. Legend has it that there are countless other worlds outside of our world. One of them is even vaster than our world, with a longer history and more powerful at the same time. It's said that there are also saints and countless cultivators in that world. However, the origin of this legend is too long ago. Until now, No one has truly gone to that world and returned. Therefore, that world is only a legend now. Xianwen smiled. So there really is such a legend here. Hearing that, Luo Fan's eyes lit up and he smiled. Xianwen finally realized that something was wrong and was slightly surprised. He began to carefully examine Luo Fan. After a while, he finally realized that Luo Fan had a completely different aura from them. His expression changed, and he exclaimed, "Could it be that fellow Taoist came from that world?" His expression was rather strange. There was both surprise and fear, as well as a complicated emotion that was difficult to make a decision. Seeing Xuanwen's expression, Luo Fan knew that he had noticed something. However, this was also very normal. He was not a native of the devil world, so naturally, he could not be the same as the cultivators in the devil world. It was normal for the cultivators with good eyesight to be able to see the difference between him and the cultivators in the devil world. If you're talking about a world that also has a saint, then I'm afraid that's the case. Luo Fan smiled. Impossible. In an instant, Xianji, who was accompanying him, shouted loudly. His voice was like thunder, shaking the surrounding clouds and causing them to distort violently. It was as if the void could not withstand such a roar and was about to collapse. Xianji was also an old man. Although his cultivation realm was a little lower than Xianwen's, he was also at the peak of the sage-to-be peak. Although he had not reached the level of false age and could not find the way to step on the 9 steps, he was still quite terrifying. Translator, Zephizi editor, Dioquin, although his cultivation realm was a little lower than Xuanwen's, he was also at the peak of the sage-to-be peak. His name was Ji, and he was proud of his intelligence. People like him were usually extremely stubborn. Once they were certain about their beliefs, it was extremely difficult for them to change. Since Xianwen had some understanding of the legend, he naturally had some understanding of it too. Due to his superior intelligence, he was able to see more things from this legend. Through the countless rumors of the past, he had a clearer understanding of the difficulty of communication between that world and their world. He knew very well that there were many worlds between the demon realm and that equally vast world. Moreover, there must be some kind of unimaginable and terrifying power that blocked the communication between the two worlds. At least, since ancient times, countless cultivators had searched for the existence of that world. There were even terrifying existences like the level 9 demisage realm among them. However, none of them could bring back any definite news. To confirm whether that world really existed or not, one could tell how difficult it was to communicate between the two worlds. Although the person in front of him was strong and even vaguely stronger than their sect leader, he was not as powerful as the legendary demisage realm that made people feel despair. Such an existence, wanting him to believe that he could do something that even a level 9 demisage could not do, was simply subverting his worldview. He could not believe it no matter what. Although Xianji did not speak much in the past few days, the few words that he said were enough for Luo Fan to roughly understand his character. Hearing him deny that he was from the Earth universe, Yishiwen could not help but shake his head and sigh. He knew that the only way to change Xianji's mind was to take out the heaven cauldron of the divine court. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible. He could not help but feel that he was at a disadvantage. However, fortunately, he did not need Xianji to completely believe him. He directly said that he came from the Earth universe and was not a cultivator of the demon realm, but he did not need Xianji to believe him. He was just too lazy to make up an origin for himself. Whether Xianji believed him or not, it did not affect him much. Therefore, he only chuckled and ignored Xianji. He did not want to pay attention to him, but Xianji would not give up. He said coldly, "The Azure Temple has treated you with sincerity, but I did not expect you to treat our sect with lies. Do you think that the integrity of our sect can be taken advantage of? Junior brother Xianji, be careful with your words." Xianwen shouted softly. Ever since Xianwen appeared in front of Luo Fan, he had a peaceful and casual expression on his face. Although he could not perfectly control his power and aura, causing the surrounding space-time to fluctuate slightly, giving off an inexplicable sense of awkwardness, causing the surrounding space-time to distort, overall, he still looked harmless. However, at this moment, he suddenly shouted softly with a solemn expression. His entire aura changed drastically in an instant, and a terrifying aura that could oppress ordinary cultivators to the point that they would be scared out of their wits soared into the sky. In an instant, the surrounding time and space seemed to have darkened significantly. It was as if they had fallen from a harmonious paradise into the deepest hell in the blink of an eye. It was as if the slightest movement from him would cause the entire world to flip and collapse in an instant. The power of someone who was about to become a demi-sage was instantly revealed. Xian Ji trembled slightly when he heard Xian Wen's shout. His body trembled slightly. He turned around and bowed to Xian Wen, saying, "I was rude." Xian Wen's expression became slightly better when he heard Xian Ji's words. He slowly retracted the aura from his body, and in the blink of an eye, he returned to his original harmless appearance. However, at this moment, Luo Fan obviously could not treat him as harmless anymore. The appearance of a beast that had suddenly woken up left a deep impression on him. My apologies, my apologies. This junior brother of mine has always been focused on studying all kinds of legends. Now, even his brain is a little damaged. He has offended you. I hope you can forgive him, Xianwen said to Luo Fan apologetically. If it was before, everyone present would definitely feel indignant at Xianwen's apology. However, at this moment, no one showed such an expression. The reason was because when Xianwen revealed his aura, the aura that caused their expressions to change. However, to Luo Fan, it could not even make his eyebrows twitch at all. That aura that could even shock their souls was like a spring breeze to this person. This allowed them to instantly understand how powerful Luo Fan was. They instantly understood that if Luo Fan attacked without any hesitation, the entire savage beast spiritual formation would not be able to suppress him. With such strength, Xianji's words were clearly too much, but they were worthy of an apology from their sect master. When Luo Fan heard Xianwen's apology, he just smiled and said, "Fellow Xianji's words are also within common sense. What I said was indeed somewhat unbelievable, but what crime have I committed? Fellow Xian is too serious, too serious. I completely believe that fellow Xian Ji came from a similarly vast world." Xianwen chuckled. With this chuckle, the atmosphere returned to its previous casual and natural state. To be honest, I am quite interested in that vast world. Right now, I only need to forge a pseudo-divine artifact to become a pseudo-divine artifact. I have been collecting materials for tens of millions of years, but I still haven't gathered all of them. I have the intention to head to that world to find some materials. I wonder if fellow Xian Ji can point me in the right direction? Xianwen asked. At this moment, Xian Ji revealed an ashamed expression. Chapter 1224. Luo Fan smiled and said, "Since I've appeared on this island, do I still need to tell you where it leads to the outer world with sages?" Xianwen's expression changed when he heard Luo Fan's words. He exchanged glances with Xian Ji, who was more intelligent than the other disciples. Both of them saw the shock in each other's eyes. However, amidst the shock, the two of them were still in disbelief. "Are you referring to that forbidden area?" Xianwen carefully confirmed with Luo Fan. This sea was called the War-Torn Ocean. It was most famous for being a forbidden area not far from this island. It was also a famous forbidden area in the entire demon realm. Even the name of the sea was derived from that forbidden area. Therefore, when Luo Fan mentioned it, they naturally thought of the forbidden area, called the War-Torn Ocean. They were shocked because of how dangerous the forbidden area was. Although they did not experience it directly, they knew from various legends that even pseudo-sage cultivators could not safely enter and exit the forbidden area. If this person came to their world from the outer world through that forbidden area, didn't that mean that this person was even more terrifying than pseudo-sage cultivators? How could they not be shocked? However, at the same time, if this was true, it was enough to shock them. As a result, they couldn't help but wonder if Luo Fan was deceiving them. They wondered if Luo Fan didn't come from the world beyond the heavens where saints existed, but was instead a cultivator who came from some unknown corner of the world. He purposely said something that could not be confirmed, but could only shock them. Luo Fan naturally understood their mentality quite well, but he didn't say anything. He just smiled slightly, nodded, and said, "Naturally so. If it wasn't for my good luck, I might have perished along the way, and my soul would have been scattered." These words, this caused the expressions of many of the cultivators present to change slightly. After a while, Xianji could not help but say, "What you said is really unbelievable. I wonder if you can prove it?" Luo Fan chuckled and said, "How can I prove it? If you believe me, then so be it. If you don't, no matter how much I say, no matter how much evidence I bring out, you won't believe me. Moreover, this is not the main reason I came here. There's no need to dwell on this matter." Hearing Luo Fan's words, Xianji couldn't help but be at a loss for words. Although Luo Fan's words were difficult to accept, he had to admit that it was true. He admitted that no matter what reason Luo Fan gave, or what evidence he used to prove it, he might not believe it. Instead, he would find many other explanations to overthrow the evidence. No matter how real something was, if he had the intention to look for it, he would certainly be able to find some flaws and flaws. He was very clear about this point. Seeing Xianji at a loss for words, Xianwen could not help but feel a little helpless. He could only change the topic and said, "If that's the case, I wonder what you came here for?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "I see that your sect has taken control of many countries on this island. Moreover, you will occasionally cause all sorts of massacres on this island. I'm really curious. I wonder if there's anything special about this. I hope you can teach me." Xianwen and the others could not help but change their expressions when they heard Luo Fan's words. For a moment, no one spoke. The scene fell into silence. Luo Fan saw their expressions and knew that there was indeed something special about this. There must be some secrets that he did not know about. Otherwise, they would not have acted like this. They would definitely answer his question, or, at the very least, refuse him. He could not help but secretly rejoice. Regardless of whether he could obtain the answer he needed here, at least it showed that the direction he had been working in was not wrong. If he continued in this direction, he would definitely be able to gain something. Even if he could not fully understand the truth of the entire demon realm, he would at least be able to gain something that would make him happy. If fellow Taoist had asked about other things, we would have told you directly. However, fellow Taoist has asked this question, which is something that we cannot answer directly. Xianwen let out a sigh and said, "Why is that? Is there something mysterious about it?" Luo Fan frowned. Since fellow Taoist has asked this question, it seems that fellow Taoist has already discovered something. I wonder if fellow Taoist has discovered anything? Xianwen said. As for Luo Fan's identity, he was already clear about it. After all, Luo Fan and Fu Lu first met because of the conquest of the country. Thus, Fu Lu naturally knew that Luo Fan was the Ling nation's imperial teacher. Since Fu Lu knew, it naturally meant that Xianwen and the other higher-ups of the Azure Temple also knew about it. I have some gains, but it is precisely these gains that make me even more puzzled. Luo Fan sighed. As he spoke, he did not hide anything and directly took out his imperial teacher's seal from his sleeve. The bottom of this seal now seemed to be 10 centimeters long, and its height was about twice as long as before. It looked quite special. Since his identity was already known to the other party, it was obvious that the other party also knew that he definitely had the imperial teacher's seal. Since that was the case, he naturally did not need to hide that he had found some special gains from the imperial teacher's seal. However, even if he did not intend to hide it, Luo Fan did not directly reveal his findings. Instead, he only hinted at it. If the real secret was what he had discovered, there was naturally no need for him to say anything, and the other party would be able to completely understand. However, if the real secret was not this, then there would be other explanations for him to take out the imperial teacher's seal, and he would not reveal his special findings. Seeing Luo Fan take out the imperial teacher's seal, the expressions of Xianwen and the others changed slightly. It was this change. It made Luo Fan realize that the imperial teacher's seal was most likely related to the real secret, and was most likely related to the true profundities. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan only had a faint smile on his face. He simply put the Imperial teacher's seal back into his sleeve. I didn't expect that in such a short period of time, after conquering a few small countries, fellow Taoists would actually understand the truth. It's truly admirable. Xianwen sighed. Xianwen sighed. Is that really the reason? Luo Fan frowned. Of course. The construction method of the Imperial teacher's seal is bestowed by heaven and earth. After every country is established, the emperor will lead his officials to worship the heavens for the first time, and heaven and earth will naturally condense an imperial teacher's seal of various sizes and bestow it to the corresponding officials of the country. Such an imperial teacher's seal, each country, they have all sorts of mysterious effects. They are compatible with heaven and earth. They can condense providence, and the living beings who hold the imperial teacher seal will receive unfathomable support, greatly increasing the cultivator's cultivation speed. Ordinary mortals will have their lifespans increased, and they can even become gods after death. They can live in the underworld soil of various countries and obtain a different kind of longevity. Xianwen did not hide this and directly explained. The underworld soil of various countries? Luo Fan frowned. He had been on this island for so long, but he had never sensed such a thing before. This was the first time he had heard of it, and he could not help but feel rather curious. He did not know what the underworld soil was and what special characteristics it possessed. Oh, the underworld soil is similar to the imperial teacher's seal. When the country is born, it is formed by heaven and earth. It is located in a mysterious space that exists between reality and illusion, and it is compatible with many imperial teacher's seals. When the living beings in this country die, their imprints will naturally be absorbed by it, and they will condense in the underworld soil that exists between reality and illusion. Based on their contributions to this country, they will naturally receive all sorts of treatment, such as punishment, enjoyment, or even becoming gods after death. This is just a boring place, and to us cultivators, it is meaningless. Xianwen explained with a smile when he saw Luo Fan's surprise. This was obviously just some common sense, and any cultivator with a little common sense would know this. Even if Luo Fan could not obtain the answer from him, he could easily obtain the answer from other places. Naturally, there was no need to hide it. I see. No wonder I haven't discovered the existence of the underworld soil even after staying in the Ling Kingdom for so long. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. So this thing is an existence like the internet. Of course, Luo Fan did not say the last sentence out loud, and he only thought about it in his heart. Although the concept of the internet was not a secret, he was probably the only one who understood it. The other cultivators would definitely be confused. What was the point of saying something that he could understand, but the others did not? As for the reason for this analogy, in Luo Fan's opinion, the underworld soil of this country was exactly the same as the internet that he had seen on Earth before he transmigrated. Apart from some differences in appearance, everything else was basically the same. The internet was also a kind of space that existed between reality and illusion. It was said to be real because this network could contain almost all information, and it could even open up a virtual world for the spirits of living beings to live in. Speaking of falsehood, it was because such an internet did not exist in the real world at all. No matter how good one's eyesight was, even with the unimaginable eyesight of a cultivator, it was impossible to discover the existence of the internet in the real world. Only with the help of various terminals could one discover the existence of the internet, and one might even be able to enter such a network through special methods. Apart from that, the internet also had another characteristic, which was that it was formed by a combination of terminals. Without these terminals, the entire network would not exist. From this point of view, the underworld of each country was very similar to the internet. They were both in between reality and illusion, and both couldn't be discovered in normal real space-time. However, they were able to contain some things. Compared to the internet, there were only some differences in appearance. What was even more similar to the internet was that the underworld of each country was also made up of many terminals, which were the seals of many officials. Without these seals, there would be no underworld earth. Fate energy. So they call this blessing fate energy. However, speaking of which, this kind of blessing, it can indeed be called fate. Luo Fan thought about what Xianwen had said before. After he obtained the Imperial Tutor's seal, he felt that he had received an indescribable blessing from a layer of laws, which could greatly increase the speed of his cultivation. This kind of change was somewhat similar to the legend of obtaining providence. It was reasonable to call this kind of blessing as fate energy. Going by this analogy, if the Imperial Tutor's seal could increase the speed of a cultivator's cultivation, then the seals of other officials should also have a corresponding effect. Perhaps it was to increase their luck, or to give them some protection, or perhaps it was to increase their strength. As for what it was exactly, he could only wait until he had the chance to find the seals of some officials to study. Fellow Daoist, now that you understand all this, you should know why we want to control these countries. Xianwen looked at Luo Fan's enlightened expression and said with a smile, "Indeed, I understand. A cultivation sect doesn't just need material resources. It also needs the blessing of fate. If there is no more fate energy, that sect will obviously become unstable." Luo Fan nodded. "However, although I understand this, I still have some doubts." After Luo Fan nodded his head, he changed the topic. "Oh, do you have any doubts? There's no harm in speaking your mind. If I can answer your question, I'll definitely not hide it from you," Xianwen said, rather curiously. He was obviously very interested in how many questions Luo Fan could have after being the Imperial Preceptor for such a short period of time. He wanted to know what Luo Fan could ask. Based on what I've experienced recently, the expansion of the country and the increase in the population will increase the providence even more. If that's the case, why did you leave so many countries on this island? Why didn't you just unify the entire island? That way, there would be fewer rebellions, and wouldn't you be able to obtain more fate? Luo Fan asked. Xuanwen's expression changed slightly when he heard that. This time, he did not directly answer Luo Fan's question. Instead, he fell silent, as if he was thinking and weighing something. Apart from Xianwen, everyone else's expressions changed constantly, as if they were thinking at the same time. However, this question seemed to be of great importance, so they did not dare to disturb Xuanwen's thoughts. Although their thoughts changed, none of them dared to interrupt Xuanwen's thoughts. None of them dared to interrupt Luo Fan's thoughts. Under such circumstances, the floating fairyland-like platform fell into silence. If everyone present was a mortal, the entire platform might have been drowned out by the sound of heavy breathing. However, it was obvious that there were no mortals here. Therefore, at this moment, there was not even the sound of breathing, not even the sound of a heartbeat. It was a state of dead silence. When Luo Fan saw how a single sentence from him had caused the situation to become like this, and it was even more silent than before, he knew that it would not be easy for him to obtain the answer to this question. In fact, it was extremely likely that he would not be able to obtain the answer at all. Even if he obtained the answer in the end, it would definitely not be like before, where he could obtain it with just a few sentences. However, even so, Luo Fan was not worried. His expression was as calm as before, as if he did not take this matter to heart at all. He did not show that the answer to this question was what he wanted at all. The reason for this was naturally because he was confident. He was confident that he could definitely obtain the answer to this question. Even if there were some twists and turns in the process, the final outcome would definitely not change. Apart from his own strength, the most important reason for this confidence was the existence of the heavenly cauldron of the Divine Court. The Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron was a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure. Although there was still a huge gap between such a magic treasure and a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure that was refined by a real level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure over a long period of time, it definitely had a crushing advantage over cultivators or magic treasures that were not at the level 9 pseudo-sage. Even if there were more powerful cultivators hidden in the Azure Sky Temple, they were just ants to him. Any world, no matter how special or special it was ultimately a world of strength. As long as one had enough strength, they would have an absolute advantage. Generally speaking, they would be able to achieve their goals. Therefore, Now that Luo Fan had enough confidence and absolute strength, he was extremely confident that he would be able to obtain the answer he wanted in the Azure Temple. With such confidence and confidence, it would be strange if Luo Fan was not confident, calm. After a while, Shinwen seemed to have finally thought it through. He said, "It doesn't matter if I just give the answer to this question to you, fellow. However, this answer was found by the ancestors of our sect over a long period of time, and we made countless sacrifices in the process. If I just give it to you, I will not be able to face the ancestors." Chapter 12:25. Xianwen's words were very obvious. He was clearly saying that this question was beyond the scope of answering for free. If you want an answer, you can, but you have to pay. Although Luo Fan wasn't completely sure that this would be the case, it wasn't completely out of his expectations. Thus, he directly let the other party state the answer. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Xianwen smiled and said, "Good, you're very straightforward. Then I won't hold back. If you want to know the answer to this question, you must fulfill 2 conditions. First, you must be able to defeat me. Second, my sect wants to refine a pseudo-sage treasure and is lacking a material. You must find it for my sect." Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but frown and said, "Lacking a material? What material are you talking about? Do you have a place to search for it?" Hearing that Luo Fan didn't care about the first condition and directly asked for the second condition, Xianwen couldn't help but feel an inexplicable annoyance in his heart. This kind of behavior clearly meant that there was no doubt that he would be able to defeat him. There wouldn't be any problems. This made Xianwen, who thought that although he couldn't see through Luo Fan, he was still in the same realm as Luo Fan and wouldn't be much weaker than him. How could Xianwen not feel dissatisfied? However, he was still the sect master of the Azure Sky Temple after all. Although he was irritated, he was still rational and quickly suppressed his irritation. However, in his heart, he would teach Luo Fan a lesson and let him see how powerful he was. After realizing how ridiculous his confidence was, he opened his mouth and said, "This material, for fellow Taoist, should not be a difficult thing to do. It's just the will of the world of a specific world. The will of the world of a specific world. It's not that easy to obtain." Luo Fan frowned. The will of the world existed in any world. This kind of will didn't mean much to normal cultivators. This was because it operated from the perspective of the world itself. The way it operated was fundamentally different from normal living beings. Unless one was a sage, even if one's cultivation realm was raised to the extreme, one would definitely not be able to understand the way the will of the world operated. However, the world will of any part of the world. However, they were all extraordinary existences. After all, it was the will of an entire world. Even the most ordinary world was grand and vast, and ordinary cultivators couldn't compare to it. With Luo Fan's current cultivation realm, they wanted him to destroy the part of the world. That was naturally a simple matter. However, it wasn't that easy for him to extract the will of the world. It was the same for ordinary worlds. This was the special world that Xianwen had mentioned. The difficulty would only become more difficult, not easier. That's why I need your help. If fellow Taoist agrees to these 2 conditions, then the answer to this question can be given to fellow Taoist. Xianwen smiled. Luo Fan frowned when he heard that. He had indeed fallen into a state of hesitation. He secretly weighed the pros and cons of this. Was it worth it to pay such a price for the answer to a question? After a while, Luo Fan said, "I'm not sure if the answer to this question is really worth it for me to exchange these 2 conditions. I wonder if fellow Taoist can first tell me how important this answer is?" When Xianwen heard that, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. Naturally, he wouldn't be overjoyed because Luo Fan doubted the answer to this question. Instead, looking at Luo Fan's reaction, he clearly felt that the second condition wasn't much of a problem. How could Xianwen, who already lacked the world will and couldn't successfully refine the pseudo-sage treasure, not be overjoyed? After having hope, Xianwen couldn't be as indifferent as before. He seemed more proactive and said, "That's natural. If fellow Taoist directly agreed to it, I would instead suspect that fellow Taoist is insincere. Although the answer itself is only a sentence, this sentence is extremely important. It might even affect fellow Taoists' life and death, and affect fellow Taoists' future destiny. Many of our sect's ancestors have already used their lives to explain this point. When Luo Fan heard that, his heart skipped a beat. Although he suspected that Xianwen was exaggerating, he didn't dare to take the risk. Even if there was a high possibility that this sentence was just a bluff from the cultivator in front of him, as long as there was a slight possibility of it being true, it was worth 100% of his effort to exchange for it. With this thought, he made up his mind and said, "All right, if that's the case, then I'll agree to these two conditions." Great! When Xianwen heard that, he was even more overjoyed. Not only was Xianwen overjoyed, but Xian Wu, Xian Ji, and the others were also overjoyed. Obviously, they also knew how important these two conditions were to Xianwen. They understood that if these two conditions were really completed, the strength of the entire Azure Temple would be greatly improved. When Luo Fan saw this, he was even more convinced of the importance of that sentence. After Xianwen shouted in joy, he stood up and said to Luo Fan, "Now, let's see if fellow Taoists can complete the first condition." The first condition was that Luo Fan had to be able to defeat Xianwen. When Xianwen said that, it was obvious that he wanted to fight with Luo Fan and test out Luo Fan's strength. Luo Fan had already expected this. These two conditions, in fact, were only one condition. The first condition was actually a prerequisite for the second condition. If Luo Fan couldn't complete the first condition and defeat Xianwen, then the second condition would be meaningless. If he couldn't even defeat Xianwen, how could he believe that Luo Fan could do what he couldn't? This formation is jointly set up by the Azure Temple, the Yin God Cult, and the Wuan Nunnery. If we fight here, it will definitely affect the other two sects, which is a little inappropriate. Why don't fellow Taoists follow me out of this formation and fight in the boundless sea? Xianwen said with a smile. Why not? Luo Fan naturally didn't mind. He was confident that he could defeat Xianwen in the formation, and he wouldn't lose any confidence if he fought outside the formation. Under such circumstances, what difference did it make to him if he fought here or not? Xianwen smiled when he heard that. He raised his hand and pointed into the air. In an instant, the entire formation trembled slightly. A long streak of light descended from the sky and appeared on the platform. In the end, it turned into a long flight of stairs that led directly to an unfathomable place. As soon as Luo Fan saw this staircase, he knew that it was basically the same as the staircase that led him into the formation in the outside world. It also looked extremely long from the outside, but after stepping on it, he would find that the staircase was only a few steps long. Xianwen smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, please." Luo Fan smiled too. He said, "Please." Then, he stepped onto the staircase. Sure enough, it was just as he had guessed. The moment he stepped onto the stairs, he felt that there were only 9 steps on this seemingly endless flight of stairs. At the end of the 9 steps, however, it was a boundless sea. The sea was extremely calm. There were no signs of land within a range of billions of miles. It was obvious that the staircase had directly crossed the void from the formation and connected to the boundless sea outside the island. This was compared to the situation when they directly entered the formation from outside the mountain range. It was many times more powerful than before. At this moment, Xianwen had also stepped onto the staircase. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. With a few steps, they reached the end of the staircase and arrived at the sea that the staircase faced. After the two of them left, the staircase shrank and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. It was as if it had never been there. Luo Fan's heart moved, and he had already discovered the location of the island he had stayed on before. He also found out where the battle between the Venerated One and the other powerful level 9 pseudo saint was. His current position was right in between the two. In the bureau, the distance between the two locations wasn't much different. The island was billions of miles to his left, while the war-torn zone was billions of miles to his right. It was obvious that Xianwen had purposely chosen this location. Didn't Luo Fan say that he had come from the war-torn zone? Choosing this location was the fairest for both of them. The island could be treated as Xuanwen's home ground, while the war-torn zone could be treated as Luo Fan's home ground. As such, it was naturally the fairest location. After Luo Fan found out where he was, he couldn't help but smile. It's a good battlefield. It's very fair. I thought that you wouldn't be satisfied with this battlefield. Since you're satisfied, that's great, Xianwen said with a smile. Luo Fan sensed that someone was spying on this location. He smiled and looked in the direction of the spy. This must be the method your sect uses to observe battles, right? That's right. After all, this battle concerns our sect's deal with you. It's impossible to observe without any witnesses. I hope you can understand. Xianwen was slightly shocked by how sensitive Luo Fan's senses were. He looked in the direction of the savage beast spirit formation and said, at this moment, he was even more worried about whether Luo Fan could defeat him. Of course, there was also hope amidst this worry. If Luo Fan could really defeat him, wouldn't that mean that he had a greater chance of success in extracting the world's will from that specific region? Xianwen shook his head and calmed his emotions. He said to Luo Fan, be careful, I'm going to attack. Why say so much? Let's do it. Luo Fan smiled and said calmly. As a powerful cultivator who had cultivated from zero until now, he was only one step away from becoming a pseudo-sage. Xianwen had absolute confidence in himself. Seeing how calm and composed Luo Fan was against his attack, he naturally felt a little frustrated and unwilling. But he still moved with anger. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void. A huge palm appeared in front of him and slammed towards Luo Fan. The palm looked like a real palm made of flesh and blood, but it was green in color. As soon as it appeared, it naturally triggered the laws of this demonic realm. It directly triggered an unimaginable power, enveloping the space-time within a radius of 10,000 miles in a strange domain. The laws of this island seemed to have undergone a subtle change, as if they had gained a master that they didn't have before. Xianwen. Such a change was very common in other worlds. It was not difficult for a quasi-sage to grasp all the laws of a certain region. The difference in cultivation level would only affect the size of the region. His cultivation level had reached the pinnacle of quasi-sage. That was Xuanwen's current cultivation level. After that, his ability to control would rise to an unimaginable level. At that time, he would even be able to control the laws of the entire world. But that was only in other worlds. In this demonic realm, such a change was extremely extraordinary. One should know that the laws of the demonic realm had been integrated with the Great Tao. The Great Tao. What kind of inconceivable and mysterious existence was this? How unimaginable and uncontrollable would the laws of the world that had been integrated with it become? One could imagine how difficult it would be to control it. Under such circumstances, he had to be like any other world. To be able to completely control the law layer of a certain area and become the master of the world in that area, the difficulty of this was countless times greater. Generally speaking, a peak quasi-sage would be able to control the laws of the world. Only then could he control the laws of the world within a radius of a few hundred miles. Under such circumstances, but Xianwen could push this area to 10,000 miles. And it seemed like he wasn't even trying his best. How rare was this? And how powerful was he? It was easy to imagine. After the azure palm appeared, it shook slightly, and the world within a radius of 10,000 kilometers underwent a tremendous change. The normally calm sea turned into a boundless void of space. There was nothing else in the surroundings. Only Luo Fan, Xianwen, and the huge azure palm appeared in the void. Such a change was not just a change in perspective, but a real change that belonged to the world itself. In other words, it wasn't a camouflage that turned this sea region into this boundless void. Instead, this sea region had truly and completely turned into such a void from its essence. This was the uniqueness of the laws of the demonic realm. Because it was integrated with the Great Tao, changing the laws of the world was equivalent to changing the Great Tao. And the change of the Great Tao corresponded to the space-time of heaven and earth. Naturally, it was a direct change in its essence. Luo Fan looked at the void and could not help but show a slight surprise on his face. He did not expect Xianwen to use such a method to deal with him. There was no vitality at all in this almost empty space of the universe. Moreover, time and space had been strengthened to a certain limit, giving him a feeling that even if he were to unleash his full power, he would not be able to completely destroy this space-time. At this moment, the cyan palm stretched forward and fiercely squeezed toward Luo Fan. That's right. It was not a slap or a grab, but a squeeze. The palm made an okay gesture. Its other 3 fingers spread out, and its thumb and index finger closed together. It was going to squeeze Luo Fan right in the middle. When Luo Fan saw the huge green palm squeeze, he could not help but smile faintly. This smile was not forced, and it was not a smile of extreme anger. Instead, he instantly saw the changes in the palm. The way it squeezed clearly did not mean that the palm was only using the power of 2 fingers to deal with him, while the other 3 fingers were just for decoration. As a matter of fact, the posture of the palm was an extremely mysterious magic art. Or rather, this gesture was actually the most intricate hand seal in this world. The power gathered between the thumb and index finger even exceeded the palm's own power. The 3 fingers seemed empty, but they were actually constantly stirring the surrounding laws, causing the laws to continuously gather more and more power between the thumb and index finger. It was going to completely crush everything that was enveloped by these 2 fingers. In the face of such a dangerous and seemingly humiliating posture, Luo Fan's entire body shook. He raised his fist and blasted it towards the cyan palm. Luo Fan's punch was extremely pure. What it possessed was pure power. There was nothing else. There is no such thing as the power to trigger the laws of the world. No such thing as vibrating time and space or anything else. Such a punch did not even have a fist shadow appear. The fist itself directly blasted towards the green palm. When such a punch was blasted out, the powerful force directly caused a fist-sized hole to appear in the surrounding law layer along with the trajectory of Luo Fan's fist. The appearance of this loophole made the trajectory of Luo Fan's fist appear very obvious in this part of the cosmic void. That pitch-black void trace was deep and clear, making people suddenly feel that the surrounding seemingly empty cosmic void was simply full of unknown things. How could there be the slightest feeling of void? When he sensed the appearance of this fist, Xuanwen's expression changed slightly. He pushed with both hands, and the green palm suddenly turned into a fist that smashed towards Luo Fan's fist. During this process, the green palm rapidly shrank. In the end, it shrank to the size of an ordinary fist the moment it came into contact with Luo Fan's fist. Kaboom! An earth-shattering roar instantly rang out. Along with this loud sound, endless strange sceneries instantly enveloped the area that was under Xuanwen's control, spanning a radius of 10,000 miles. These scenes caused this region to change into millions of strange sceneries at every instant. At times, it would be the deepest nothingness. At other times, it would be filled with various unique existences. At other times, it would turn into a strange land. At other times, it would turn into the original sea region. Chapter 1226. Amidst this strange scene, the spot where Luo Fan's fist came into contact with the cyan fist produced a gray blur. Then, countless tiny cracks appeared on the cyan fist. Then, Xianwen couldn't help but cry out in pain. The power on Luo Fan's fist was too strong and too pure. He couldn't believe that such power would appear on someone who hadn't even reached the false saint realm. The purity of this power even repelled everything, including the great Tao, the rules and laws, time, space, and so on. It was precisely because of this strength and purity that when the fist struck out, a long trace that completely repelled the rules and laws and completely repelled the great Tao appeared. Although Xuanwen's technique was indescribably exquisite and could unleash more than 100 times his normal strength, he still couldn't withstand such a powerful and pure power. The cracks that appeared on the cyan fist increased in number and density. In the end, it exploded with a loud bang. The powerful impact instantly expelled the chaotic scene caused by the impact of the laws in the surroundings. It even completely shattered the boundless void in front of them, causing the two of them to be surrounded by a calm sea that stretched as far as the eye could see. It looked exactly the same as when Luo Fan first appeared, as if nothing had happened here before. However, this was only on the surface at that time. In fact, in reality, the rules and laws within a radius of 10,000 kilometers were shaking violently. Although this area wasn't completely destroyed due to the terrifying suppression of the rules and laws of the entire demon realm, it was still abnormal. If a cultivator were to merge with the rules and laws to comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao, what awaited him would definitely be a shocking backlash from the rules and laws. Even if that cultivator was as strong as a quasi-saint, he would definitely suffer injuries that couldn't be healed for tens of thousands of years. If he was slightly weaker, it was even possible that it would explode from the backlash. He would turn into nothingness. At this moment, Luo Fan's fist didn't slow down at all. It brought his body across the void. He arrived in front of Xianwen. He blasted straight at his head. Similarly, almost the same as before, a long scar appeared in the void as the fist flew forward. It was a void. There was no time, no space, no laws, no yuan qi, no trace of power. Of course, compared to the traces that had appeared in the cosmic void before, the traces that had appeared here were much fainter and smaller. Obviously, the stability of the rules and laws of this normal demon realm was much stronger than the rules and laws that Xianwen had changed with the help of a wondrous technique. The gap that appeared when it was subjected to the same repulsion was also much smaller. Xianwen's reaction was extremely fast. Faced with such a fist, his figure flashed, and he instantly disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan's punch hit empty air. With Luo Fan's control over his strength and body, if he didn't hit the target he wanted to hit, the power naturally wouldn't explode. Therefore, although the force of the punch was enough to shatter the void and disintegrate the rules and laws, after Xianwen dodged, his fist only quietly hovered where Xianwen had been. There was no explosion of power at all, nor did it cause any special effects. It seemed like all his previous actions were just a bluff. Not a bad technique. You can integrate your body into the layer of laws, and with the help of the layer of laws, you can move your body, Luo Fan exclaimed in admiration. He then turned his body and looked at a place not far from his right. There, Xuanwen's body had appeared at some point. However, judging from his slightly pale face, his condition was clearly not as good as before. The method he had used to instantly disappear was the first time Luo Fan had seen it. In the past, at least in other worlds, the teleportation method that Luo Fan had seen was to directly tear open the void or fold time and space, thereby achieving a method to transfer one's body to another place without passing through a continuous space. However, that was not the method Xianwen had used just now. In that instant, Xianwen had fused his body with an extremely wondrous law, borrowing the various wondrous connections between laws and laws to transfer his body to another law, and then materialize once more, appearing once more in the real space-time. This method was obviously more suitable for the demon realm in front of him. After all, the rules and laws of the world of demons were fused with the ways. Compared to the rules and laws of other worlds and other universes, such an existence was much more stable and stable. Under such circumstances, if one wanted to fold or tear apart space-time, if one did not want to be obstructed by the laws and laws, one would need to use some special methods to bypass them. With that, it was obvious that there was an additional process, but it was not as convenient as doing it in other space-time, other worlds, and other worlds. In comparison, completely fusing with a specific law was much simpler. Not only could he use the stability of the rules and laws, but he could also reduce the process, reduce the consumption of power, and increase the speed at which he could use it. With all these advantages, was there a need to say more about what to choose in times of danger? Looks like you didn't lie. I've never heard of such a punch before, Xianwen said as he looked at Luo Fan with a complicated expression. Since you're saying that, do you think this battle will end here, and that I've completed the first condition? Luo Fan chuckled when he heard that. Although I admit that your punch is powerful, I haven't admitted defeat just like that. Xianwen raised an eyebrow when he heard that, and smiled. As he spoke, he raised a finger, and a strange object appeared in the void before him. This object had the appearance of a strange building. The building seemed to be a temple, and it was squarish. The entire building was a sky blue color. It was densely covered with countless fine lines. At first glance, because they were so densely packed, one would think that they were the lines on the exterior of the building. The structure of these lines was extremely complicated and extremely mysterious. Every line seemed to be connected to a specific rule or law in the rules and laws layer. All the stability was gathered in one place, forming an unimaginably mysterious whole. As soon as the building appeared, it naturally emitted a sacred and dignified aura. The entire building floated in the void. Strange waves spread out in all directions. Under these waves, the rules and laws layer began to slowly shrink and extend. It was as if the rules and laws layer in the surrounding area were instantly strung together by this temple, and were brought into the temple's control. This is a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure, Luo Fan said as soon as he saw the building. He instantly came to a realization. He knew the truth behind this building, the mysteries of this building. It was clearly of the same nature as the palm that Xianwen had displayed earlier. It also contained incredible power, and also had the ability to control the rules and laws within a certain range, and even completely change the rules and laws. However, compared to the control of the cyan palm that Xianwen had displayed before, the control of the law layer of the magic treasure that appeared in front of Luo Fan at this moment was far from what that palm could compare to. That kind of perfect and flawless aura was more than 10,000 times stronger than the control of that palm. Previously, when the palm appeared, Luo Fan only saw that the surrounding space and time had changed from the surface of the sea to the boundless void of the universe. His body had not felt anything special because of such a change. However, at this moment, just as this building appeared, he actually felt that the rules and laws layer where his body was actually starting to reject his existence. Countless forces generated from the law layer came from all directions, from both inside and outside of his body, constantly acting on him, as if they were trying to completely erase his existence from this space and time. There was no need for anything else. Just from the feeling that these two things gave him when they appeared, Luo Fan could feel the huge difference between this magic treasure and the palm from before. This treasure is the Azure Temple. It is a magic treasure that countless generations of ancestors of our sect have painstakingly gathered materials and refined. Now, it is only one step away from the true pseudo-sage level, which is to integrate with the world's will. Fellow Taoist, please be careful. Xianwen said this as he looked at the building that appeared in front of him almost obsessively. When Luo Fan heard this, a look of realization appeared on his face. So that's how it is. It is indeed an extraordinary magic treasure. However, he was actually a little surprised. This Xianwen had cultivated for at least 10 billion or even 100 billion years. The many ancestors of the Azure Temple had cultivated for countless times longer than this. It was impossible for them to have cultivated for less than this amount of time. Under such circumstances, the Azure Temple had only managed to refine a pseudo-sage magic treasure that was half a step away from the pseudo-sage level. Even now, it still failed due to the lack of materials. The low efficiency of the refinement was really unbearable for him. Thinking about the time it took for him to refine the level 9 pseudo-sage God Court Heavenly Cauldron, it was only 10,000 years. Compared to the people of the Azure Temple who needed billions or trillions of years to refine a level 1 pseudo-sage magic treasure, he indeed had the right to look down on their efficiency. However, in the process, Luo Fan seemed to have neglected one thing. There were two fundamental reasons why it only took him 10,000 years to refine the God Court Heavenly Cauldron into a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. Firstly, there was a refinement rune that was completely the foundation of a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure that was deduced from the venerable 1 pseudo-sage treasure. Secondly, it was because he was almost omnipotent in that universe and could reach a level that was close to that of a sage. Such a foundation allowed him to distort time at will and accelerate it to trillions of times faster than normal every second. It was because of these two reasons that he was able to refine this level, 9 pseudo-sage treasure, in 10,000 years. Without either of these two conditions, it would be impossible for him to achieve this. Without the first condition, if he wanted to complete the refinement of this pseudo-sage treasure, he simply lacked the most important foundation. It was almost impossible for him to refine a pseudo-sage treasure, let alone pursue the speed of refinement. Without the second condition, with just the first condition, the time it would take for him to refine a pseudo-sage god court heavenly cauldron made him suspect that he might not even be able to do it from this time period to the Dharma ending age where his main body was. After all, there were billions of eras between this time period and the Dharma ending age, and each era was as long as 6 billion years. From such a comparison, it could be seen that the Azure Sky Temple had spent billions of years to refine this magic treasure until it was on the verge of entering the pseudo-sage level. Although this speed could not be said to be fast, it was many times more efficient than Luo fans. I think it's better for fellow Taoists to take out your magic treasure. Otherwise, I'm afraid there's no suspense in this battle. Xianwen's confidence was greatly boosted, and he smiled at Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at this magic treasure. He secretly waited. He smiled and shook his head. Fellow Taoists, just do it. If I really can't hold on, I'll take out my magic treasure. He wanted to rely on his own body and his own strength to face the magic treasure that Xianwen had taken out. Xianwen frowned when he saw Luo Fan's reaction. It was obvious that he was very unhappy that Luo Fan was looking down on him. He secretly made up his mind to teach Luo Fan a lesson. With this thought, he did not say anything else. He only shouted for Fong Xinjian to be careful and pointed at the Azure Sky Temple. In an instant, a green light shot out from the Azure Sky Temple. This green light was extremely mysterious. In the void, it naturally fused with the surrounding nomological laws, directly manifesting a green figure. As soon as this cyan silhouette appeared, a powerful and unparalleled aura pressed down on Luo Fan. The aura was incomparably powerful, and it contained an incomparably powerful killing intent. It caused the space within a radius of several 100 million kilometers to turn into a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The originally calm sea turned into a strange scene in the blink of an eye. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan felt that the laws and the surroundings that were originally repelling him suddenly turned into countless blazing flames, lightning bolts, gales, and waves. They attacked and cut him in a frenzy, wanted to burn him, shatter him, blow him into ashes, and disperse him completely. The green figure's aura and strength were all a level higher than Xianwen's. He had already crossed over the demi-sage realm and stepped onto the first step. In other words, he had achieved the so-called false sage realm in the demon realm. This false sage realm green figure was extremely fast. As soon as he took shape, he charged straight at Luo Fan. With a wave of his hands, a huge heavenly halberd appeared in his hands. With a piercing cold light, it directly cut through the laws and cut through time and space, slashing towards Luo Fan's head. If that's all, this magic treasure is nothing, Luo Fan said calmly. At this moment, his eyes widened and a horrified look appeared in his eyes. However, he suddenly realized that the green light that was spewing out from the Azure Sky Temple had not disappeared. Instead, it was still spewing out continuously condensing into one green figure after another in the void. The aura and the level of the aura that these green figures emitted were all the same. However, there was a huge difference in the nature of the aura and the aura. Moreover, these figures were all tall, short, fat, thin, and male. There are even some with 3 heads and 6 arms, 4 faces and 8 arms, or 24 heads and 36 arms. In the blink of an eye, The void in front of Luo Fan was already densely packed with hundreds of cyan figures. The appearances of these green figures were vivid and lifelike. Their facial features and figures were all meticulously detailed. If it wasn't for the fact that their entire bodies were green, it would be impossible to tell that these green figures were formed by the condensation of green light. After these figures appeared, they did not say a word. Instead, they directly spread their aura throughout the void and crushed towards Luo Fan. Then, they stood up and brandished all kinds of weapons, rushing towards Luo Fan like a torrent. The Sky Temple, the Sky Temple. No wonder it's called a temple. It's not called anything else. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but shout loudly. He didn't dare to be negligent anymore. His figure rushed up, and he casually threw a punch. Amidst the dazzling light, a pure and powerful fist force erupted, instantly smoothing out the indescribably repulsive layer of laws around him. It also completely dispersed the imposing aura emitted by the hundreds of green figures around him. It didn't affect him in the slightest. Then he twisted his fist and clasped his fingers together, drawing a mysterious trajectory in the air, leaving a long trace in the void, dispelling the laws of the void, directly hitting the ancient halberd that was flying towards him first. With a soft sound, the rule layer around the sky halberd trembled slightly. Countless layers of cracks appeared. All kinds of special light and shadows wrapped around the sky halberd, making it seem like it had instantly become a strange thing that could not be described with words. Then the light and shadow completely collapsed and rolled up. It instantly wrapped around the green figure and condensed again. The green figure instantly collapsed and disappeared without a trace. Fortunately, it's still a normal level, one pseudo-saint. At this moment, Luo Fan finally revealed a smile. Chapter 12:27. Although the cyan figures were powerful and numerous, they were not much stronger than the first-level pseudo-saint. They were just ordinary first-level pseudo-saint experts. Such existences might be a great threat to ordinary cultivators at the exceptional Down Master realm, but they were not a threat to Luo Fan. However, from this, one could see how incredible the power of the Azure Temple was. It was only a half-step pseudo-saint treasure, but it already had such a powerful power that it could instantly condense hundreds of first-level pseudo-saint experts to attack its opponents. If this magic treasure was upgraded to the real pseudo-saint level, how powerful would it be? Just how powerful would the creature that was condensed be? Luo Fan thought to himself, but his body did not stop moving. He kept flashing in the void. He did not use any special divine sense, nor did he take out the divine court heavenly cauldron. Instead, he relied on his physical strength to display all kinds of incomparably pure power attacks towards the hundreds of cyan figures of different shapes and techniques. Each of the hundreds of figures was at the first level pseudo-saint level, and the divine sense they used was also different. They contained countless mysteries, and they cooperated closely with each other. The strength they exerted was hundreds of times stronger than the combined power of the whole group. In the face of such an attack, although Luo Fan's strength was astonishing and the effect of each attack was beyond imagination, he was still unable to destroy all the cyan figures in an instant. He could only continuously repel those figures and occasionally cause some damage to them. The Azure Sky Temple had no choice but to spray cyan light to replenish the damage of those cyan figures. At this moment, Luo Fan's divine path was flawless and without hindrance. Every move he made contained endless, incredible mysteries. Just by looking at his specific punches, kicks, fingers, palms, and collisions, one couldn't see anything special. One could only see that his attacks were so pure, and that the Demon Realm's law layer couldn't resist his pure power. But when one looked at Luo Fan's attacks together, one would find that Luo Fan's many attacks were a complete whole. This entire body was like an extremely great painter that was sketching out various inconceivable profundities of the Grand Tao and Midair, and he was displaying the supreme truths of the heavens and the earth that he possessed to the entire world and everything in the universe. From afar, his movements seemed so mysterious, so profound, and so incredible. Even Xianwen gradually sensed a grand and boundless scene unfolding before him under the attack. The scene displayed endless mysteries that he either understood or had yet to understand. Under such circumstances, Xianwen unknowingly loosened his control over the Azure Sky Temple. The hundreds of azure-colored figures were in such a state. However, the attacks gradually slowed down. The few openings that were initially very few became more and more obvious. This made it easier for Luo Fan to attack these figures, and it was easier for him to deal damage to these figures. This process lasted for several hours. In that instant, the space within a radius of hundreds of thousands of kilometers gradually became independent. The laws and laws within were gradually separated from the outside world. However, this time, the cause of this was not Xianwen or the Azure Sky Temple, but Luo Fan. This was the result of the effects of the various techniques that Luo Fan used in midair and the laws and laws that were left behind. As for the absolute control that the Azure Sky Temple had over the laws and laws, it had long since been replaced by the remnants of the many attacks that Luo Fan had unleashed. This change happened unknowingly. Even Xianwen could not sense it. In his heart, he even thought that he was in control of everything. Within the area that the Azure Sky Temple controlled, the laws and laws were still undergoing all sorts of inconceivable changes according to his will. However, he did not know that the situation had already been reversed. Amidst these changes, after the hundreds of green figures were damaged, the replenishment from the light emitted by the Azure Sky Temple became slower and slower. The openings that were revealed became more and more. It was as if, after the absolute control over the laws and the surroundings was broken, the Azure Sky Temple's operation became much more obstructed. At a certain moment, Luo Fan let out a soft cry. He raised his palm and bypassed a figure with 3 heads and 6 arms. The 6 arms were holding 6 powerful weapons, and his palm struck the figure's chest. In that instant, the figure's reaction speed became slightly slower than before. However, it was a fatal slightest bit. It allowed Luo Fan's palm to strike the figure's chest without holding back. It allowed the pure palm energy contained in Luo Fan's palm to pour into the figure's chest without holding back, and then explode with a loud bang. One could imagine the power of such a terrifying attack. In that instant, the terrifying explosive power caused the figure with 3 heads and 6 arms, which had caused a lot of trouble for Luo Fan, to explode with a loud bang, causing the figure to turn into countless tiny green fragments that scattered in all directions. And these fragments were also constantly shattering and collapsing. In the end, they completely turned into nothingness and disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had never been there in the first place. Such a change, however, caused a chain reaction. The hundreds of figures who had originally cooperated closely and were incomparably mysterious instantly revealed a big flaw. The movements of each figure had an oversight that should not have appeared before. In other words, it wasn't that it shouldn't have appeared in the first place, but it had always existed. But because of the 3-headed, 6-armed figure that Luo Fan had just destroyed, it had become an oversight that no longer existed. Such an oversight would not be overlooked even in a battle between mortals, let alone a battle between exceptional Dao masters. At this moment, Xianwen came to his senses. He tried his best to control the battle and commanded those figures to form a new cooperation. However, it was still too slow. Luo Fan was like a tiger pouncing on a flock of sheep. As his figure flashed, he raised his hands, feet, fists, and fingers. In the blink of an eye, he had completely smashed dozens of figures that had reached the level of first-level divine realm. It turned out that only smashing one figure had caused such a big problem in their cooperation. Now that he had smashed dozens of figures, the problem of their cooperation would certainly be greater, not lesser. Xianwen tried his best to control it. However, in this situation where the flaws were getting bigger and bigger, he was unable to control them. No matter how he tried to control them and change them, in the end, he could not gather all the figures into one again. He could no longer form a cooperation that made Luo Fan unable to use it as before. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan's movements became more and more casual, and the results became more and more impressive. In just a short quarter of an hour, he had completely destroyed all the hundreds of cyan figures, clearing the sky in this area in an instant. Only Luo Fan, Xianwen, Azure Temple, and the traces of the Law of Law left by Luo Fan's previous attacks that could control this area were left here. Apart from that, there was nothing else special. At this moment, Luo Fan had no intention of stopping immediately. Previously, Xianwen had been standing at the side and controlling the situation. Instead, he had been constantly moving and attacking. Now that he had the upper hand, how could he not do something? In an instant, his figure moved, and he directly pounced forward. Taking advantage of the fact that the Azure Temple was a little sluggish after losing hundreds of powerful figures, it was unable to quickly gather power to attack again. He directly bypassed the temple and arrived in front of Xianwen. Then, he threw a punch at Xuanwen's chest. This punch, Luo Fan did not hold back at all. The power contained within it was enough to completely destroy an ordinary universe. Under the agitation of the fist's power, the Law of Law layer before this punch rapidly disintegrated and reassembled. In the end, it formed a fist-like imprint, which seemed to be wrapped in a layer of afterimages. With a terrifying might, it crazily smashed toward Xuanwen's chest. Seeing this, Xuanwen's expression was one of extreme shock and despair. At this moment, he realized that his absolute control over the Law of Law layer around him had completely disappeared. Instead, he felt as if he was being repelled by the universe and the Law of Law layer around him. There was a formless power that was constantly pressuring him from the Law of Law layer. Win! At this moment, Xianwen could not help but shout loudly. However, this was clearly not the time to look into this. The power in Xuanwen's body gushed out wildly. The dazzling golden light instantly condensed a boundless space-time around his body. The distance between him and Luo Fan, who was originally only a few feet away from him, widened at an unimaginable speed. In an instant, it had widened to who knows how many billions of miles away. At the same time, Luo Fan's fist also widened to who knows how many billions of miles away from him. It was as if there was no longer any trace of threat to him. Luo Fan looked at the boundless golden world that suddenly appeared in front of him, and couldn't help but show a look of admiration on his face. This world was not a fake world. It was the real world, everything in it, including time, space, earth, vital energy, mountains and rivers, and even all the living beings in it. Everything in it was a completely real existence. This world was clearly not created in a hurry. Instead, it had been created for countless years, and it was only being set up now. Thinking about the specific process of the world appearance, he knew that this world had originally fused with Xuanwen's power. Or rather, it had originally been a form of Xuanwen's power. Fusing the world into one's power was not difficult, but it was something that Luo Fan had never thought about before. Opening heaven and earth, opening a world, and even opening a universe, these were all extremely ordinary things for the current Luo Fan. In the past, Luo Fan had thought about creating a world anywhere, such as in the void, on a rock, on a grain of sand, on a leaf, in a formation, in a rune, or in a three-dimensional talisman. However, he had never thought about fusing the world with its power, turning it into the power within one's body and circulating it within one's body, providing all sorts of wondrous uses and powers. Therefore, at this moment, when such a technique appeared in front of him, it was like a brand new combination, a brand new world had appeared in front of him. Even if such a technique was not very exquisite, his eyes could not help but light up, and he could not help but exclaim in admiration. It's a pity. However, there are still too many omissions in the structure of this world itself. It has not reached a state of perfection, but it has wasted such a wonderful inspiration. After Luo Fan exclaimed in admiration, he could not help but feel a sense of pity. This world might be extremely perfect in the eyes of ordinary people, or even ordinary cultivators. It was incomparably magical, but in the eyes of Luo Fan, who was very knowledgeable and had even traversed two perfect worlds, and one great world, there were too many mistakes in its structure. There were too many places that could be adjusted and perfected. It even made him feel like he could not bear to look at it. This was also very normal. Luo Fan was very knowledgeable. He had seen so many heavens and earth, worlds, and spaces that he himself couldn't even count them all. Therefore, his understanding of the heavens and earth was deep beyond imagination. He could see the weakness of any imperfect heavens and earth with a single glance. He could see the flaws of an imperfect world. However, not all cultivators could be like him. Although Xianwen had controlled the Azure Temple for hundreds of millions of years, and his cultivation realm was only half a step away from becoming a level 1 pseudo-sage, he was only a cultivator born and raised in the demon realm. Among the worlds that he had seen in his life, other than some small worlds, there was only the demon realm before him. Under such circumstances, how could his understanding of the world compare to Luo Fan's? The world that was created, how could it be truly perfect? In Luo Fan's eyes, there were many flaws and mistakes, but that was very normal. If one wanted to achieve perfection, that would be too demanding. It would be a joke if the world that was filled with flaws in Luo Fan's eyes wanted to stop Luo Fan's attack. After randomly picking a flaw in one of the laws of the world, Luo Fan easily broke through the barrier of time and space between the world. In an instant, he traversed a distance of billions of miles and arrived in front of Xianwen. He continued to punch at Xuanwen's chest. The technique that Xianwen used was a technique that was painstakingly created by the patriarchs of the Azure Temple. It was natural for it to have a powerful attack, but more importantly, in times of danger, when the world was spread out, he could naturally find a chance of survival in an impossible situation. He could even turn defeat into victory. In the past, when he fought with others, there were less than 100 battles that could force him to use this technique. However, every time, the worst result he could achieve was a stalemate with his opponent. The best result was to turn defeat into victory and defeat his opponent. It was because of such a battle record that Xianwen was already relieved after using this technique. He was even considering if he should just make peace with Luo Fan just like that. He had already achieved the first condition. At that moment, he suddenly felt the golden world around him shake. Then, he felt a strong sense of danger coming from the front. His expression changed drastically as he instinctively blocked with his hands. At that moment, he felt a sharp pain in his hands. A terrifying power surged into his hands. The purity of this power was something that he had never seen in his life. Although it wasn't the strongest power he had ever seen in his life, it was still rather impressive. It wasn't any weaker than the strongest power he could unleash. After such a strong, pure power surged into his hands, it instantly expelled all the power that existed in his hands. At that moment, his hands were no longer protected by any power. He directly used his body to withstand the impact of this power. The result was obvious. The power did not need to go through any practice. As soon as it surged in, Xuanwen's hands were completely shattered. At that moment, indescribable fear surged in Xuanwen's heart. He quickly withdrew the golden world around him into his body and turned it into golden power again to stop the pure and powerful power from destroying his body. The speed at which the world turned into power returned to his body was unimaginably fast. It did not even seem to need time, and the entire process was completed with a single thought. However, by the time his golden power returned to his body, the pure and powerful power had already swept through his entire body. It arrived at his neck and was spreading towards his head, intending to shatter his head into pieces. His body below his neck had already been completely shattered. It was reduced to dust and scattered in all directions. The sagely old man was only left with his head that floated in the air with a terrified expression. The golden light was relatively powerful, and after the power completely disintegrated his entire body, its power seemed to have decreased greatly. So, when the golden light collided with the pure and powerful power at his neck, a thunderous rumble that seemed like it could destroy the world resounded. After that, the pure and powerful power finally vanished completely, and Xianwen was no longer in danger of dying. Xianwen had just heaved a sigh of relief when he noticed that Luo Fan was hovering in front of him with an ambiguous smile on his face. Luo Fan's right hand was clenched into a fist, and he seemed like he was about to attack. Xianwen felt a chill run down his spine. Chapter 1228. Hearing that, Luo Fan smiled faintly and took a few steps back. Although only his head was left of his body, for a cultivator who was at the pinnacle of sage to be and was only a step away from the pseudo-sage realm, such an injury was no different from a scratch on the skin of an ordinary person. It was not an injury that was difficult to heal, let alone fatal. After Luo Fan took a step back, Xianwen took a deep breath and an infinite amount of power was generated. It kept outlining and mending under his head. In the blink of an eye, a body that was exactly the same as Xianwen's original body was formed. Moreover, the strength of his body was no different from before. It was still as sturdy and powerful as before. It was as if he had not been injured at all. Cultivators at the innate Grand Luo realm could already be self-sufficient. Since Xianwen was already at the peak of sage to be, he could naturally do the same. Therefore, even though the amount of yuan qi and energy needed to form this body was enough to make ordinary cultivators feel hopeless, and it would take an ordinary cultivator hundreds of millions of years to collect all of it, Xianwen did not need to ask for it from the outside world. His own body could produce enough yuan qi and energy. Moreover, the speed was fast enough, and he did not need to ask for it from the outside world. That was why Xianwen was able to reform his body so quickly. That was why the body he formed was exactly the same as his previous body, without any loss in strength or power. Xianwen breathed a sigh of relief after his body was completely formed. Although only his head was left of his body, this kind of injury was not enough to cause him serious consequences. However, as a cultivator with an innate Taoism aptitude, he was left with only his head. Even so, he was still not used to it and felt extremely uncomfortable. He lifted his hand and pointed. The blue sky temple, which was a distance away from him, followed a certain law and appeared above his head through time and space. However, after coming here, Xianwen did not put it into his body. Instead, he activated the power of the blue sky temple with a thought. A green light gushed out of the blue sky temple and instantly engulfed the void within a radius of 100 miles. Luo Fan sensed at the moment the green light gushed out. This light did not contain any offensive power, nor did it have any malicious intent towards him, so it did not make any move to stop him. It just floated there and waited quietly. After the light enveloped the void within a radius of 100 miles, it began to seep into the law layer. Gradually, it began to fuse with all the laws in the layer of laws, and began to undergo some extremely subtle changes to these laws, causing these laws to begin to differ from the laws of the outside world. This difference caused the laws, time, and space within 100 li to gradually become disconnected from the outside world. Luo Fan sensed this change and instantly came to a realization. So, is to prevent everything that happens here from being sensed by the outside world. After understanding this, he knew what Xianwen was going to do next. He couldn't help but look forward to it. The cyan light did not change the law layer for long. After a few breaths of time, the space within a radius of 100 miles around Luo Fan and Xianwen had become completely independent of the outside world. It had completely become a space-time that was disconnected from the outside world. At this moment, the feeling of being spied on from the savage bee-spirit formation that Luo Fan felt had completely disappeared. Even the aura of the demon world that originally filled the entire demon world, which contained endless mysteries and principles, had disappeared without a trace. It was something that he had not felt since entering the demon world. Relaxation, freedom, and purity gradually surged into his heart. Now, this place should be able to cut off all unconscious prying. Xianwen waited for the green light to stabilize before saying. Xianwen said with a smile after the green light stabilized. Unconscious spying. This word was used with great charm, causing Luo Fan to come to a realization. A smile of understanding appeared on his face. This ability to cut off the connection between the inside and the outside world, making the space-time within a radius of 100 li completely independent from the outside world, thus cutting off all spying from the outside world, was wondrous, but it was only produced by a half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure after all. In this way, no matter how powerful this ability was, it would be limited by the magic treasure's grade. This kind of limitation could be broken through by pseudo-sage cultivators with the intention, let alone stronger existences. Therefore, this seemingly perfect blocking effect could only produce an absolute effect on the peeping of the cultivators or powers whose cultivation states were lower than that of the pseudo-sage level. As for the cultivators or powers above the pseudo-sage level, it could only work when those cultivators or powers didn't consciously try to break through this defense and this effect. Seeing Luo Fan smile, Xianwen knew that Luo Fan had seen through all of this. He could not help but smile faintly, and no longer asked about this question. He just smiled and said, "Since you have already completed the first condition, in order to show my sincerity, I will tell you the answer that you want to know. I only hope that after you know the answer, you can keep your promise and continue to complete the second condition." Hearing Xianwen's words, Luo Fan nodded and said, "Of course I won't go back on my word. I hope that you can tell me the answer." The reason why Xianwen was willing to say the answer that Luo Fan wanted at this time and not wait for Luo Fan to complete the second condition was not because he was stupid, but because he had to do this. Using a one-sentence answer to threaten someone was, of course, effective in the short term. But if it took too long and there were too many threats, it might arouse the other party's antipathy, and it might even completely exhaust the friendship that had been formed, turning the person who could have been a friend into an enemy. Now, Luo Fan had already shown his great strength and could even defeat him with a pseudo-sage treasure. Under such circumstances, it was obviously unwise to push Luo Fan into a hostile position. It was precisely because of this consideration that Xianwen had no choice but to tell Luo Fan the answer he wanted to know at this moment. He didn't dare to wait for Luo Fan to get impatient and turn against him because of his scruples. As for the possibility of Luo Fan not carrying out the second question after knowing the answer, although Xianwen was a little worried, it was only a little. He believed that with Luo Fan's strength and with his cultivation, he would not be able to defeat Luo Fan. It shouldn't be like this. Of course, if Fang Xingjian really did that, it would be better to turn against him directly than to turn against him at the final stage of the second condition. At least if he turned against him now, he could still keep the coordinates of the specific world that the Temple of Azure Temple had, so that the Temple of Azure Temple would not really suffer a loss. The question you asked is the reason why we don't do it, even though we can obtain much more providence than we have now if we unify the entire island. Xianwen repeated the question that Luo Fan had asked previously. Xianwen said. Luo Fan naturally nodded slightly when he heard that, indicating that it was exactly so. Xianwen sighed, and a bitter expression appeared on his face as he said, "How can we not know that we can obtain more providence by doing this? However, it's not that we don't want to do it, but that we don't dare to do it. In fact, hundreds of billions of years ago, there was a period of time when our sect tried to unify the entire island. At that time, we had already signed an agreement with the Yin God cult and Wuyin Temple to merge the last 3 countries on the entire island, and then the 3 countries would control the resulting providence. However, just as the 3 sects were about to implement this agreement." Speaking to this point, a faint look of fear appeared on Xuanwen's face. After a while, he gradually recovered and said, "It was when the 3 countries had just completely merged. The moment the emperor and officials of the unified countries began to worship the heavens, the entire island was enveloped by a holy aura. This holy aura was born from nothingness, and it completely enveloped the entire island, enveloping all the living beings on the island. Under this holy aura, even a pseudo-sage who was as powerful as our sect's patriarch was suppressed like a mortal by this holy aura. He could not move at all, and he could not even think." Xuanwen's words were a little hollow, as if he was recalling everything that had happened back then. After this holy aura, This island appeared in a world of nothingness. The boundless sea that originally existed around it completely disappeared. It was as if this island had always been in this world of nothingness. Outside this island, an island that was exactly the same as this island suddenly appeared. An island that was exactly the same. Luo Fan frowned. That's right. Whether it was the size, the terrain, or all the living beings on it, all the spirit veins, all the energy, and even all the cultivators were exactly the same island, Xianwen said. And then? Luo Fan had a premonition, but he could not confirm it, so he asked. And then there was a war. A terrible war between two islands that were exactly the same. Xianwen said. That island looked exactly the same as this island. Although the cultivators on the island could all find their counterparts on this island, the cultivators would not make any mistakes when using their own powers, as normal cultivators would. They could unleash the power of the corresponding cultivation realm. Apart from that, the unified country on the island also perfectly unleashed all the power of that country and would not make any mistakes like normal countries would. This kind of war, an indescribable expression appeared on Luo Fan's face. Although normal cultivators could sometimes unleash their powers beyond normal, most of the time, they would not be able to unleash their powers perfectly and would make some mistakes from time to time. In this way, one could imagine the result of the war between the two islands. The war lasted for more than 100,000 years. In the end, more than 99% of the living beings and all the cultivators on this island died. The three great sects, the Azure Temple, the Een God Society, and the Wuan Temple, only had some low-level disciples left to inherit their sect's inheritance, and the entire secular country on the island was completely ruined, Xianwen said, his body covered in sweat. As expected, Luo Fan sighed. After the war, the island disappeared in the void and reappeared in this sea area. And it was only 10 days since the day the entire island was truly united to worship the heavens. 10 days is equivalent to 100,000 years, such a degree of time distortion. Luo Fan still sighed. After that, it took us tens of millions of years to slowly recover some of our power. After that, our sect found out through a lot of research. Once an independent continent, no matter how small an island is unified, be it in the form of a country or a cultivation sect. As long as they were unified, they would be sensed by the 54 saint sovereigns. Then, one of the sages will set up a test. Once the test is passed, all the living beings on this island will be brought to the 4 continents and become the disciples of that sage. They will become the power of that sage's conquest. If they fail to pass the test, they will have to start everything from the beginning, and all the living beings will be completely disintegrated. They can only wait for a long time to develop again, and in the end, repeat the process again. What we encountered was a complete copy of the existence on this island. It was the test of a certain sage. Xianwen let out a long breath and said, there was fear, helplessness, and even resentment on his face. The changes were extremely complicated. When Luo Fan heard this, he suddenly felt a kind of nervousness in his heart, but also a kind of expectation. Nervous. He thought about how he almost unified the entire island in a state of ignorance and was about to face the test of a sage. But he was expectant of the same thing. Luo Fan had already formed his own unique view of the world, and traces of his existence spread across the 3 perfect worlds. He was extremely confident in himself. If he were to face a sage or a level 9 fake sage, he naturally knew that he would not be a match for him. But if he were to face someone who was exactly the same as him, whether it was the power of their abilities or their cultivation, whether it was their power or their body, against an opponent who was exactly the same as him, he had enough confidence that he would definitely not fail. It was because of this confidence that when he knew that he was likely to face the test of a sage, facing an opponent who was exactly the same as him, he did not feel fear. Instead, he felt anticipation and excitement. Only by defeating oneself can one become the power of a sage. So that's how it is, Luo Fan mumbled. Xianwen was currently in a daze. and did not notice Luo Fan's special expression. Hearing Luo Fan's words, he sighed and said, "That's right. The test of a sage is to defeat another individual who is exactly the same as oneself, which is to defeat oneself. Only by truly doing this and truly defeating oneself can one head to the center of this world, join the sage's sect, and participate in the many deadly tribulations to obtain supreme opportunities. It's just that it's extremely difficult to defeat oneself. Even though the founder of our sect was a pseudo-sage expert, he could only hold on for more than 100,000 years. As for our descendants, we can't even become a pseudo-sage expert. We are much weaker than the founder of our sect, so we can only hold on for a shorter period of time. However, the possibility of success is basically impossible. Because of this, after that time, we made the decision to never unify this island. Even if unifying this island could give us countless times more fate energy, we would never unify it. In fact, because we were worried that there were too few countries, secular empires would accidentally unify the island out of ambition. So we divided the island into tens of thousands of countries and did our best to prevent the island from unifying. I see. I understand now. Thank you, fellow Taoist, for dispelling my doubts. Luo Fan suppressed the anticipation and excitement in his heart and bowed to Xianwen. Although he did not think much of Xianwen and the others' worries, he was rather grateful to Xianwen for answering his questions. If he did not know the answer to this question, and rashly wanted to unify the entire island in the future, he would definitely unknowingly suffer extraordinary resistance from the three sects for no reason. At that time, it would definitely be extremely troublesome for him. At this moment, after knowing what would happen after unifying the entire island, he was mentally prepared whether he wanted to continue unifying the island or not. Whether it was the test of a sage that might appear after unifying the island in the future, or the hostility and resistance that he might suffer in the process of unifying the island, it was the same. With such gains, he naturally felt grateful to Xianwen and needed to express his gratitude. When Xianwen heard Luo Fan's words, he recovered from the terrifying memories in the past and said, "These are the conditions that we agreed on, and I'm only fulfilling what I promised back then. There's no need for you to be so courteous, fellow. If you didn't mention such an important secret now, I don't know when I would know about it. How can I not thank you?" Luo Fan naturally chuckled and said. Seeing that Luo Fan did not show any signs of turning against him, Xianwen secretly heaved a sigh of relief and said, "You're too polite, fellow. Although this matter is quite important, I'm not the only one who knows about it. It's a bit too much for us to use this to exchange for your two conditions." Chapter 1229. Hearing Luo Fan's words, he could not help but reveal a joyful expression on his face. Only then did he feel at ease. Even at this time, Luo Fan was still willing to say such words. This showed that he did not intend to go back on his word. After all, if he had the intention to go back on his word, there was no need for him to use such empty words to brush him off now that he had already gotten his answer. That's exactly what I was thinking. However, we still need a lot of preparation to head to that place. It will take a few days before we can set off. Why don't you rest for a few days in our sect before setting off?" Xianwen said with a smile. Luo Fan was naturally indifferent, so he nodded with a smile. Seeing Luo Fan nod, Xianwen was overjoyed. He raised his hand, and the azure sky temple shook slightly. The boundless azure light that was originally spraying out was instantly retracted into the azure sky temple, as if it had never appeared. Then, the azure sky temple shrank slightly and returned to his body, completely disappearing from the outside world. After such a change, Luo Fan felt that the aura of the demon realm that filled the entire demon realm had once again filled his body. The feeling of being spied on from the direction of the wild bee spiritual array had also reappeared. In fact, this feeling of being spied on was even more intense than before. As soon as Luo Fan sensed this, he instantly knew what was going on. This was obviously because the people in the Azure Sky Temple were very concerned about the outcome of the transaction between him and Xianwen. After the isolation mechanism disappeared, they immediately shifted all their attention to this location, wanting to use this method to see the outcome as soon as possible. Regarding this, Luo Fan could only smile and let it go. At this moment, he was paying more attention to the demon world's aura. This demon world's aura filled the entire demon world. To the living beings in the demon world, it was like the air around ordinary people on a planet. They all knew of its existence, but they did not care about it. To Luo Fan, who was not born in the demon world, but came from the universe on Earth, this aura was like a living being in the void of the universe, observing the air. It was a novelty. This was the process of the demon world's aura disappearing and appearing. The changes in the aura showed that there were many mysteries contained in the aura. These were profound mysteries. Normally speaking, if he wanted to sense it, he would have to calm his heart and mind to sense it. Only then would he be able to sense a trace of it. He paid some attention to these mysteries. He could sense it. There is indeed the aura of a saint. Luo Fan sensed the change in the aura of the demon world. He sighed inwardly. Compared to the aura of the demon realm that he had sensed in that universe, the aura of the demon realm that filled his body at this moment was so thin that it was almost undetectable, let alone condensing into something like an aura world. Amidst such a thin aura of the demon realm, among the previous changes, there were 54 extremely minute parts that appeared faster than the other parts of the aura. It felt as if 54 nails had been nailed into his body, and then the auras of other parts of his body were pulled into the void around him. Thinking about it carefully, he could even find that the 54 auras all contained a sense of eternity and indestructibility, as well as a characteristic that contained all the mysteries of the universe. If I can collect these auras and use a special method to separate them, it will be a wonderful item that can assist in cultivation. As expected, the deepest truth is always around you. It just depends on whether you have the ability to discover these truths. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. Among these auras, not only did they contain the auras of the 54 saints, but they also contained the endless auras that belong to pseudo-sage existences. If he collected these auras and allowed them to reach a certain density, even ordinary cultivators will be able to choose auras that match their cultivation realm to comprehend. In that case, there would be no need for any exquisite cultivation methods or resources from the sect. They would naturally be able to continuously improve their cultivation realm and finally reach an unbelievable height. Although it was quite troublesome to collect the aura of the demon world, it was not really that difficult. For ordinary cultivators, as long as they were willing to put in the effort to study it, there would not be much trouble. If it was someone like Xianwen who was only one step away from the 9th step and could become a pseudo-sage, they would only need a few years to condense a dense aura of the demon world that could form a world of aura. After sighing inwardly, Luo Fan threw these things to the back of his mind. Although this method could be easily achieved, it did not have much meaning to him. After all, he already had the aura of the demon world lying quietly in his sleeve, so he naturally did not need to use such a simple method to construct an item to assist his cultivation. Whether or not others could think of such a simple method to improve their cultivation realm had nothing to do with him, so he naturally would not waste his time to care about it. At this moment, a long staircase suddenly appeared in the void. It extended from the direction of the island and stopped not far away from Luo Fan and Xianwen. This staircase was extremely long, and it was shrouded in a faint light. It looked extremely extraordinary at a glance. And the starting point was not the island, but rather the void that was quite far away from here. It was as if it had directly drilled into the void and directly broke through space and time to connect to another mysterious place. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that this was the result of the Savage Bee spiritual array activating some kind of receiving method. He couldn't help smiling. "Fellow, please." At this moment, Xianwen said with a smile. Luo Fan nodded and followed Xianwen up the staircase. As soon as he stepped on the staircase, everything in front of him instantly changed. The originally extremely long staircase turned into 9 steps, and they lined up in front of him. At the top of the 9 steps was a fairyland-like platform that Luo Fan had stayed in for a while not too long ago. And on his platform, Xuanji and the others were looking at the two of them eagerly. After crossing the staircase, it shook slightly and disappeared without a trace. Then, Luo Fan and Xianwen were already standing on the platform. Everyone, get into position. We must open the door to the Azure Sky secret realm within 3 days. After Xianwen stood still, he began to order. Although he did not explain clearly what the outcome of the conversation between him and Luo Fan was. However, he said this sentence. That was the best explanation for the outcome. When everyone heard this, they could not help but show joy on their faces. They all responded loudly. Although their voices were barely calm, the slight tremble in the depths of their voices let others know how excited they were at the moment. After that, everyone very kindly bid farewell to Luo Fan. Then, they turned into a ray of light and left the platform. This attitude, compared to before, it was many times more passionate. Although this savage bee spirit formation is only a formation, it was painstakingly set up by our 3 sects for a long time to complete. I think it must be quite impressive. How about I follow you to look at this formation for the next few days? Xianwen said to Luo Fan, who stayed behind. 3 days was not a long period of time. Normally speaking, it would be over with a little rest and meditation. However, in order to express his gratitude to Luo Fan, Xianwen was not willing to give up these 3 days and let Luo Fan wait for the 3 days to pass by alone. Therefore, he planned to show the only thing they had, the savage bee spirit formation, to Luo Fan. Towards this suggestion, Luo Fan was naturally quite interested. Therefore, he smiled and was ready to agree. Just then, Xuanwen's expression suddenly changed. Then, he raised his hand and pointed at the sky. The entire savage bee spirit array trembled a few times and a green light appeared in the sky, forming an illusory green temple. As these changes occurred, an extremely tall, golden-armored deity suddenly appeared in the distant sky, along with an indescribable form and color. It seemed like an unfathomable ball of light. After these two things appeared, they resonated with the green temple that appeared in the void. They seemed to be having a gentle conversation, but also seemed to be shouting and scolding at each other. After a while, Xuanwen's expression became very ugly. He said to Luo Fan, "I'm sorry. Due to some urgent matters, I'm afraid I can't tour the savage bee spirit formation with you." Luo Fan saw the change just now and knew that something strange must have happened. He was not surprised by Xuanwen's words at all. He only smiled indifferently and said, "That's the Yin God cult and Wuyin Temple, right? Did you argue with him just now because of me?" Xianwen was not surprised that Luo Fan could tell that he was arguing with others. He only smiled bitterly and said, "That's right. This savage bee spirit formation was jointly set up by the 3 sections. Under normal circumstances, the other 2 sects would not be able to detect what happened in each sect. However, if something big happened in any of the sects, the other 2 sects would definitely notice it. Just now, the Yin God cult and Wu and Nunnery discovered the abnormality that appeared here just now, and they're blaming me." I see. Luo Fan could not help but come to a realization. Looking at the green temple that was floating in the void, he knew that this savage bee spirit formation must have something to do with the pseudo-sage treasure, the Azure Temple. Just now, when Xianwen was fighting with him, not only was the Azure Temple summoned, but it also consumed a lot of energy. As such, this savage bee spirit formation must have been affected. Of course, this kind of impact was not small. Naturally, it was discovered by the Yin God cult and Wuyin Temple. What's the result? Luo Fan asked curiously. The 2 sects said that this savage bee spirit formation is the common foundation of the 3 sects, so they wanted to visit you. Xuanwen's expression became even uglier. Hearing Xuanwen's words and looking at his expression, Luo Fan knew that things were not that simple. The most likely reason was that the 2 sects found out that Xianwen was chatting happily with him. They even tested his strength and guessed that Xianwen might need his help with something. So, they wanted to join in. Luo Fan secretly frowned. Although he was not very satisfied with such a change, he knew that it was almost unavoidable. Even though the Azure Temple, the Yin God cult, and the Wuyin Nunnery had a close relationship with each other and could even set up such a savage spiritual array together as the foundation of the three sects, it did not mean that the three sects were as close as one sect. It did not mean that there was no competition or intrigue between the three sections. In fact, even within a sect, within a clan, or even within a small group of a few people, the three sects were not as close as one. There would definitely be all kinds of competition. How could there not be all kinds of intrigue between three different sects? However, although he knew that these things were unavoidable, but Luo Fan did not intend to care about these things. He only smiled faintly and said, "What do you think?" 3 days later, we will go to the Azure Mystery Realm to extract the will of heaven and earth. It is not good to cause trouble during this period of time, so I told them that you need to cultivate in peace and that you can only come out after a month. If they want to visit, they will have to wait for a month. I made the decision on my own. I hope you can forgive me," Xianwen said with a little shame. "That's good." Luo Fan did not care about this. He did not have the mood to care about their scheming. Since he did not need to do anything and Xianwen could handle it himself, that was naturally the best. "If that's the case, why don't you arrange a cave abode for me to adjust my breathing?" After saying that, Luo Fan took the opportunity to make such a request. It was obvious that he really wanted to follow Xianwen's words and find a place to adjust his breathing and cultivate. Xianwen was even more ashamed. He repeatedly said, "No problem," then flew off the platform with Luo Fan and flew toward the cave abode not far away from the platform. The cave abode was quite huge. It looked very simple from the outside, but there was an extremely profound mystery hidden within that simplicity. Countless tiny light spots around the cave abode revolved endlessly according to an extremely profound trajectory, faintly forming a complicated and profound formation. This is a cave abode opened by one of our sect's patriarchs. That patriarch died in the sage's trial hundreds of billions of years ago, so this cave abode has never been used until now. "I hope you don't mind," Xianwen said as he brought Luo Fan outside the cave abode. He casually formed a hand seal to open it. The tiny light spots around the cave abode shook slightly, and the way they operated changed slightly. In the blink of an eye, a passageway that was neither too big nor too small opened in front of Luo Fan and Xianwen, leading straight to the entrance of the cave abode that looked like an island. "Haha, Sect Master Xianwen, you sure in a good mood. This cave abode has been out of use for hundreds of billions of years, but you're actually interested in inspecting it today." At this moment, a grand voice rang out from space. Following that, the void trembled, and a figure on a cloud appeared out of thin air not far away from where he was. The auspicious cloud shone with golden light. It seemed extremely bright and sacred. The person standing on the auspicious cloud seemed to be a young man. His cultivation was only slightly lower than Xianwen's, and he was even slightly stronger than Xianji and Xianwu. The cultivator was not very tall, but he seemed extremely capable. He wore golden armor, and his aura surged around him. He gave off a sacred and dignified aura that enveloped a large area around him. It made him seem like a god who controlled the might of the 9 heavens had descended from the sky. In divine general, Xianwen's expression could not help but change when he saw the person. He seemed to be slightly helpless, but also slightly surprised. Wasn't this fellow supposed to be in seclusion? Why did I meet this fellow Taoist here? Sect Master Xianwen is too careless. Why don't you introduce him to me? The young cultivator, called In Divine General, seemed to have just noticed Luo Fan. He nodded at Luo Fan with a smile and said to Xianwen, his words could not be more obvious, "I'm here to expose you. So what can you do about it?" Xianwen was extremely helpless when he heard this. At a time like this, if he did not want to fall out with this In Divine General, he could not let Luo Fan directly enter the cave abode to rest. As such, he could only say helplessly, as an elder of a sect, "Why have you come to the center of my Azure Temple at a time like this?" Our sects are the same breath and branch, so why do we need to care so much? Previously, you said that the fellow Taoist would need another month to come out of seclusion. In order to show our sincerity, We specially came here to wait for a month so that we can visit him as soon as he comes out. I didn't expect things to be so coincidental that the fellow Taoist is still here. That's great, haha. The Yin Divine General laughed. It's not 2 sects, it's 3 sections. At this moment, a leisurely and soft female voice was heard. Then, in an indescribable radiance, a graceful figure appeared not far away from the golden, auspicious clouds. When Xianwen heard this and saw the figure, he could not help but groan. You actually came too? You are the vice abbess of the Wu Wen Nunnery. I happen to have the same thoughts as you, in Divine General. In order to show our sincerity, we decided to wait here for the fellow Taoist to come out of seclusion. I didn't expect to come at the right time. It was indeed the right decision to come here. The woman smiled. Chapter 1230. Xuanwen's expression became even more sullen. Although the 2 sects leaders did not come personally, the 2 who came were influential figures in the sections. Although their statuses were slightly lower than his, it was quite limited. Unless he wanted to fall out with the 2 sects, he had to treat them politely. Xianwen looked at Luo Fan awkwardly and could only introduce Luo Fan to the 2 of them helplessly. After the conversation, Luo Fan found out that the woman's name was Liao Yuan, and she was the deputy abbess of the Wuyun Nunnery. The structure of the Wuyun Nunnery was generally similar to the other 2 sects, but there were some special things. That was, their sect leader was not directly called the sect leader, but the abbess. Under the abbess, there were a few deputy abbesses, which were similar to the deputy sect leaders under the sect leader of the Tianqing Temple. On the other hand, the Yin God cult also had a corresponding characteristic. That was, their sect leader was not directly called the sect leader, but the sect leader. Under the sect leader, there were also deputy sect leaders. Although the Yin Divine General in front of them was only an elder, he was a training elder, and his status was much higher than that of ordinary deputy sect leaders. Previously, Luo Fan wanted to avoid them and adjust his breath in a cave abode because of Xuanwen's request. He was not afraid of meeting the other 2 sections. At this moment, he naturally behaved rather calmly and treated them with the same attitude as he treated Xianwen. The Yin Divine General and Liao Yuan seemed to be extremely interested in Luo Fan. Although everyone knew why they were there, they did not ask directly. Instead, they chatted with Luo Fan and Xianwen. In the end, they even suggested finding a place to talk to Luo Fan. In the process, Xuanwen's expression became more and more terrible. However, he still forced himself to deal with them. In the end, because he refused to comply with their request, he led Luo Fan and the 2 of them to the place where Luo Fan and Xianwen had conversed. It was a misty platform that looked like an immortal realm. Luo Fan didn't care how unwilling Xianwen was, nor did he care what special thoughts Liao Yuan and Yin Immortal General had. Instead, he was very interested in their talk and listened to them carefully. As they conversed, he gradually learned about the cultivation characteristics of the 3 great sections. This was the cultivation path taken by the 3 great sections. It was an extremely orthodox path of cultivation. In other words, it wasn't too special. It was too unique, similar to what Luo Fan understood, but it had all kinds of cultivation paths that focused on different aspects. Among them, the Azure Temple paid more attention to it. It was power, their cultivation. It was to continuously gather the power in one's body and continuously refine this power. In the end, it was even possible to integrate this power into the world, fusing with the world, fusing with many rules and laws. However, the Yin God cult, which was different, paid more attention to the godly soul. The cultivation of the Yin God cult was to continuously refine the godly soul. In the end, they would completely melt the body and integrate it into the godly soul. Then, through the godly soul, they would derive a body that was completely based on the godly soul. In contrast, Wuyun Temple was different from these 2 sections. Wuyun Temple paid more attention to willpower, spirit, and thoughts. There were countless cultivation methods in Wuyun Temple that involved all aspects. Some of these cultivation methods refine the body, some refine power, and some even refine the godly soul. However, no matter which path they took at the beginning, they would eventually integrate into willpower, spirit, and thoughts. These three cultivation methods each had their own emphasis and characteristics, but in the end, there wasn't much advantage or disadvantage. This was the only reason why the three great sects could form such a stable alliance. As he conversed with them, Luo Fan was more and more amazed by the various wonders of the demon realm in front of him. He became more and more glad that he had entered the demon realm. He faintly had a premonition that perhaps the demon realm was where his opportunity lay. Perhaps he could grow to a height that he dared not imagine in the past in the demon realm. With this thought in mind, his interaction with the two of them became more natural. However, he did not care about what was going on behind the scenes at all. All his attention was focused on their superficial communication. Luo Fan was extremely knowledgeable. Because he had sorted out his own unique view of the world, he stood at a very high position. His perspective of looking at the problem was much higher than that of everyone present. Although he was mostly listening, the occasional words that he revealed already made everyone feel that they had gained a lot. Even Liao Yuan from Wu Yun Temple's beautiful eyes lit up, and the power in her body fluctuated slightly. Almost everyone could feel that she was gaining something all the time. Because of the existence of a cultivator like Luo Fan, who was not much stronger than them in terms of cultivation, but had a much better perspective of looking at the problem than them, the two of them, who originally just wanted to casually chat with each other, gradually forgot their purpose of coming here. Instead, they focused more and more on their communication with Luo Fan. For powerful cultivators who had reached their level, a few years, a few decades, or even a few centuries passed by in the blink of an eye, let alone a few days. While the three of them were having a pleasant conversation, 2 days passed by quickly. In less than a day, they were about to set off to the Azure Mystery Realm to extract the will of heaven and earth. At this moment, Xianwen's patience had finally worn off completely, and he interrupted their conversation and said, fellow Taoist Luo Fan, and I have a private matter to deal with, and I'm afraid we don't have the time to converse with fellow Taoists. May I know if fellow Taoists can return first, and we'll discuss the Tao with both of you after we've finished our business? Xianwen's words finally brought Liao Yuan and Divine General back from their pleasant conversation with Luo Fan, and they remembered their purpose of coming here. The two of them looked at each other with a satisfied expression on their faces. The reason they came here was to find out what plans the Azure Temple and this cultivator, who was obviously quite powerful, had, and whether they could be used by their sect. Of course, at this time, they could not just return to their sect with their tails between their legs like what Xianwen had said. They had to wait for the so-called private matter that they did not know when it would end. Sect leader Xianwen, you're wrong. Our three sects are of the same breadth and branches. The matter of the Azure Temple is our matter. Since fellow cultivator Luo Fan can help, we can definitely help too. Fellow cultivator, please don't stand on ceremony with us. Liao Yuan said with a smile. That's right. We, the Yin God sect and the Wu Yin Temple, will definitely help you. The Yin God sect was more straightforward and said with a smile. Xianwen almost couldn't catch his breath from the two's rebuttal. I already said it's a private matter, but you completely ignored what I said and talked to yourself like this. He only had such a depressed thought in his mind. However, as the sect leader of a sect, he naturally could not just give in like this. He immediately kept saying that this was a private matter that did not need to trouble others, and that he and Luo Fan could handle it. However, Liao Yuan and Divine General also used all kinds of reasons to brush him off. In short, it was just one sentence. They refused to leave. They must follow Xianwen and Luo Fan to handle that matter. Xianwen's mouth was dry from talking. However, the two of them insisted on this bottom line. There were several times when Xianwen almost could not help but want to directly throw the two of them out so that they could get out of his sight as fast as possible. Unfortunately, in his heart, he understood that although the two of them were annoying, the backing behind them was comparable to the Azure Temple. If he threw the two of them out, then the other two sects would have an excuse to directly take action and use forceful means to interfere with what he and Luo Fan were about to do. In this case, the result would not change much at all. Instead, it would directly turn against the other two sects, which was obviously not appropriate. Luo Fan looked at the three of them arguing there with a dry mouth and tongue, but he felt that it was quite interesting. He just laughed and watched to the side without saying a word. After a long time, Xianwen finally had no other way and said helplessly, "What do you want? It's impossible for you to participate in what we're going to do. This is the last principle. You don't have to think about it." Hearing Xianwen say such words, the smiles on the faces of the Yin Divine General and Liao Yuan gradually faded and was replaced by a kind of solemn expression. The fact that Xianwen had such an attitude made them feel even more ominous. Our three sects are like brothers. Anything that happens to any sect will definitely affect the other two sections. Now that you said this, it means that this matter will have an extremely great impact on our two sections. Tell me, can we not participate in it? The Yin God cult said lightly. Liao Yuan also nodded lightly and said, "That's right. What brother said makes sense. The more sect leader Xianwen is like this, the more impossible it is for us to give up. I hope that sect leader Xianwen will explain things clearly, lest there be any problems in the end. If our two sects respond hastily, it will cause irreparable consequences." Xianwen sat there, his eyebrows twitching and his face expressionless. After a while, he said, "This matter will only benefit our three sections. There will not be any harm. That's all I can tell you." Looking at the conversation between the three of them, Luo Fan only had a faint smile on his face. In his heart, he secretly thought about how they were going to end this. This kind of answer will not be able to satisfy anyone. The Yin God cult also said expressionlessly. Liao Yuan at the side smiled faintly. Obviously, he had the same idea as the Yin God cult. He did not think that this question could satisfy the Wu Yin nunnery. He must let Xianwen explain clearly what exactly was going on. "I don't want to say it, but you must know. Then, let's use the old rule." Xianwen said lightly. The old rule. Liao Yuan and the Yin Divine General's expression changed slightly. As soon as Luo Fan saw their expressions, he became more and more interested. This old rule, what exactly is it? Why did it make Liao Yuan and the Yin Divine General's expressions so rich? That's right. We can only use the old rule. Xianwen let out a long breath, and his expression became relaxed. According to the old rule, the loser has to give up all the output of the wild beast spiritual formation within 100,000 years. It's not a trivial thing. Do you really think it's necessary to do that just to hide it? An immortal general said, "That's not a big deal. I think it's necessary. If you think it's not necessary, then go back immediately. Wait for me to settle this matter in the future. Then I will personally come to explain to you." Xianwen said. That was indeed what he thought. If the two of them could really turn around and leave without caring about what he was going to do, then he really had the thought of personally going to the two sects in the future to explain to them. Even if they wanted him to personally go to the two sects to ask for forgiveness, he would be willing to do so. After all, if this matter was successful, then he would have already become a level 1 pseudo-sage. What was done was done. At that time, the Azure Temple's strength would naturally be above the other two sections. He would be able to gain a lot of advantages in the alliance of the three sections. Even if he went to the two sects, they could only express their joy. They could only express their congratulations and not say anything else. They would not be like now, afraid that the two sects would cause trouble for him. They would ruin his plan. The old rule. I can't decide on this matter. Let me ask the sect master first. The Yin God cult said expressionlessly. I also have to ask the abbess before I can answer you. Liao Yuan said at the side. Xianwen saw their attitude. He knew that they would definitely not be willing to turn around and leave. In the end, this matter would really have to be decided by the old rule. He could only sigh and said, "Do as you wish." The two of them stood up. After apologizing to Luo Fan, they used their own method to contact their sect master or abbess. After all, this was the interior of the wild beast spirit formation. Both of them had a part of the Great Formation's authority. It was relatively easy to contact their sect master or abbess. Luo Fan did not see any movement from them. He only felt that there seemed to be some kind of connection spreading from them and connecting with the wild beast spirit formation. Then, this connection fluctuated slightly. After a while, this connection was completely cut off, and the two of them came back to their senses. The sect master has agreed to use the old rule to decide. The abbess has also agreed. The two of them said. Hearing this, Xianwen sighed and said, "All right, then let's do this 10 days later. The scale doesn't need to be too big. Let's use a medium scale." All right. In these 10 days, the entire wild beast spirit formation will monitor all the cultivators of the three sects at all times. If anyone makes any unusual movements, it will be considered a failure. The Yin God cult said, "This is the rule, I naturally understand." Xianwen sighed. "Goodbye." Yin Divine General and Liao Yuan bowed to Xianwen and Luo Fan respectively. Then, they turned around and left the platform. Not long after, they disappeared without a trace and returned to their sections. Not long after they disappeared, Luo Fan felt that the entire savage beast spirit array had undergone an inexplicable change. A strange, emotionless, and strange feeling of being peeped at shrouded his entire body. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that this was the monitoring of the wild beast spirit formation. He secretly thought about it, and found that although this kind of monitoring was strict, it was not a problem for him. As long as he was willing, he only needed to use a little bit of magic power, and he could break free from this kind of monitoring at any time. He finally felt relieved and did not care about this monitoring anymore. "I'm really sorry. I didn't expect this to happen. I'm afraid that the time to do that will have to be delayed for a while," Xianwen said to Luo Fan apologetically. Luo Fan just shook his head and said, "For me, a long time or a short time is not a big problem. In any case, this is fellow Taoist matter. You can decide when to do it. Thank you for your understanding. However, fellow Taoists can rest assured. This matter will not take more than a year at the slowest. There is no need for fellow Taoists to wait too long." Xianwen said, "A year? That is indeed not long. However, I am quite interested in the old rules that fellow Taoists mentioned. I wonder if fellow Taoists can tell me about it? Of course, if there is any hindrance, then forget it. I'm just curious." Luo Fan smiled. Hearing this, Xianwen shook his head and said, "What hindrance? This is not a secret. Since fellow Taoist wants to know, I will tell fellow Taoist. I just hope that it will not pollute fellow Taoist's ears." Then, Xianwen carefully explained the so-called old rules to Luo Fan. This allowed Luo Fan to finally understand a lot of things. Although the Azure Temple, the Yin God cult, and the Wu Wen Temple had been friends for a long time and had almost formed a united body with each other. However, they were three sects after all. If there was really no estrangement or hindrance, why would they need to be divided into three sects? In reality, between the three sects, they each had their own standpoint and interests. Over the years, there would naturally be some conflicts and conflict from time to time. If these conflicts and conflicts were allowed to accumulate and develop, they would eventually become more and more intense. In the end, small conflicts would become big conflicts, and small conflicts would become big conflicts. In the end, the relationship between the three sects would be completely cut off. Therefore, in order to prevent such a thing from happening, the ancestors of the three sects agreed on a method to solve the conflicts. This method was the old rule that Xianwen and the Yin God General had mentioned before. Chapter 1231. Just now, Xianwen and the Yin Divine General and Liao Yuan mentioned that they wanted to control the scale of the war to be on a medium scale, which meant that the war between the nations would be on a medium scale. On the other hand, a medium-scale war between the tens of thousands of nations on the island would involve no more than 1,000 nations. Launching a war of this scale that involved hundreds of nations within 10 days, and finally completing the war within a year. This kind of efficiency made Luo Fan exclaim in admiration. One must know that when Ling Nation launched a war of conquest previously, their efficiency was far less than this. Because the three parties involved in this conflict were divided into two camps. In this war, the nations that each of the three sects could participate in were different. Of course, it was not to the extent that the number of nations that the Yin God sect and Wu Yin Nunnery could participate in was exactly the same as the number of nations that the Azure Temple could participate in. There was a price to be paid for using one's will to go against the will of the majority. Therefore, in this war, although the Azure Temple could participate in more nations, each of the other two sects could participate in as much as 70% of the number of nations that the Azure Temple could participate in. The total number of nations that the two sects could participate in was almost half of the number of nations that the Azure Temple could participate in. This was a huge advantage. It could be said that in such a situation, the Azure Temple had chosen to use such a rule to decide who was right and who was wrong, and to decide the outcome of the conflict. This was why the Divine General and Liao Yuan were so surprised when they heard Xuanwen's decision, and repeatedly asked him if he really wanted to do this. When Luo Fan heard what the old rule was, he could not help but be curious, and said to Xianwen, "I'm quite interested in this war. I wonder if I can watch from the side?" When Xianwen heard that, a look of hesitation appeared on his face. Although it was not the first time for him to launch a war of this scale, this was after all a rather private matter for the Azure Temple, and there might be many secrets of the Azure Temple involved in it. If Luo Fan wanted to watch, it would obviously be a little inconvenient. But he remembered that he had repeatedly delayed the time, repeatedly asked for forgiveness from Luo Fan, and repeatedly asked for Luo Fan's cooperation. But Luo Fan did not hesitate and did not care about it all. He couldn't bring himself to say those words of rejection. Helplessly, he gritted his teeth and said to Luo Fan, "Of course, there's no problem. This was just a small matter. I just hope that fellow Taoist won't find it too boring." Luo Fan naturally saw Xuanwen's hesitation, but so what? It was just as Xianwen thought. Previously, he was so cooperative that he would do whatever the other party said. If he said it would be 3 days later, there would be 3 days later. If he said it would be delayed for a period of time, then it would be delayed for a period of time. Although the truth was that it did not matter to him. No matter what, he was extremely cooperative. Now, it was time for the other party to cooperate with him. Because of this consideration, Luo Fan quite naturally enjoyed the special treatment Xianwen gave him. He smiled and said, "Thank you for your help, fellow Taoist." Since Xianwen had already made his decision, he naturally wouldn't hesitate. He immediately left the platform with Luo Fan. Although the platform looked ethereal, beautiful, and mystical, it was only a place to entertain guests, a place to relax. If one really wanted to do something, it would have to be done. Of course, it couldn't be on this platform. Instead, it was in another specialized place. Soon, Xianwen and Luo Fan arrived before a cave abode. This cave abode was quite different from the other cave abodes. Although the other cave abodes had their own wonders, they were mostly natural landscapes or mountain peaks. It could be a forest, a lake, a stream, and so on, hiding the cave abode in the various natural sceneries. However, the cave abode in front of him was different. This cave abode was built on a huge and flat surface of a building complex. This group of buildings was obviously an important center of the entire Azure Temple. The buildings on the flat surface were quite dense, and there were many cultivators doing all kinds of things. Some were asking for advice from cultivators of higher status. Some were exchanging items, and some were collecting resources. From time to time, some cultivators would enter and leave this cave abode. Some came from other cave abodes, some went to other cave abodes, and some even directly left this savage bee spiritual formation and went to the outside world to carry out some kind of mission. Starting a war that involved hundreds of countries in 10 days was not a small matter. Even if Xianwen had a lot of experience, he didn't have any time to waste. Therefore, he brought Luo Fan and landed in front of a large hall at the center of the cave under the bowing of many cultivators. This hall was quite large and magnificent. It emitted an extremely dignified and ancient aura. After landing, he began to issue orders and turned into rays of light that scattered in all directions. He entered the hall together with Luo Fan. The space inside the hall was quite vast. There were many tables and chairs placed in it. Naturally, it set off a solemn atmosphere. Xianwen first invited Luo Fan to sit on the guest seat at the top, while he sat on the main seat. Not long after, many rays of light flew toward this hall from all directions. Soon, they arrived in the hall and sat on the seats. In just a few moments, all the seats in the hall were filled with powerful cultivators. The cultivation realms of these cultivators varied, but even the lowest had reached the great accomplishment of sage-to-be realm. The highest was not much weaker than Xianwen, and was also half a step away from becoming a false sage. After these cultivators sat down, none of them spoke, but all of them had a serious expression on their faces. The other two sects have found some clues about that matter. Now, we need to settle it according to the old rules. This requires the cooperation of all the elders. I hope that all the elders will give up and work together to win this gamble together, Xianwen said after everyone had arrived. He had no intention of introducing Luo Fan to the people present, nor did he introduce the dozens of elders to Luo Fan. This was natural. The situation was quite urgent, and Luo Fan said that he was only here to watch. He naturally treated Luo Fan as if he did not exist and went to make his own arrangements. As for how much Luo Fan could see and how much he could see, it would depend on his own ability. How could he explain too much to him? Luo Fan didn't care. He just quietly looked at the many elders present and carefully pondered how many moves he would need to kill everyone present. Although many of the elders present were curious about Luo Fan, who was sitting next to the sect leader and seemed to have nothing to do with him, they did not ask too much. Since the sect master did not say anything, he must have his reasons. They just had to do their own things. Why should they ask so much? Next, Xianwen began to assign the various elders to their respective responsibilities. Listening to his arrangement, Luo Fan felt a huge network spread out in front of him. The entire island was in Xuanwen's arrangement, and it was as clear as the lines in his palm. More than 800 countries, each of which was several times stronger than the current Ling Kingdom, were gradually activated. After the elders heard the orders, they started to move. However, they did not leave the palace. Instead, they turned their orders into rays of light and sent them out of the palace. They were either sent to a certain cave abode in the formation or directly charged out of the formation and sent to a certain location on the island. As expected, Luo Fan looked at the baleful calamity chi that had unknowingly permeated the palace and sensed the wonderful changes that were happening in the law layer. He thought to himself, although the people present did not use any remarkable abilities, nor did they release much of their aura, what they were doing at this moment was starting a war that involved hundreds of nations and hundreds of billions or even trillions of people. Such wills, such thoughts, and such actions would naturally trigger a reaction from the law layer in the demon realm, which was more stable and tighter than other worlds. Of course, it would trigger the appearance of the baleful calamity chi, which would naturally trigger the subtle changes in the law layer at this moment. Luo Fan carefully sensed the very obscure, baleful calamity chi. He felt that the changes in his mind were extremely subtle, and they seemed to have become more active and restless. He could not help but feel emotional. This kind of baleful tribulation chi was quite mysterious. For some cultivators, it was like an existence akin to an inner demon. However, for some cultivators, it could be a miraculous elixir that could bring great benefits to their cultivation. After Luo Fan felt the influence of this baleful chi on him, his heart moved, and he naturally cut off the influence of this baleful chi on him, allowing his mind to completely return to normal, so that he would no longer be affected by this baleful chi. To him, the baleful calamity chi's influence on him was not like the inner demon's influence on his cultivation, but it was not a good thing either. He did not want to be affected by it. After his mind cleared up, he looked at Xianwen and the others. He discovered that their gazes had changed slightly. Clearly, all of them had been affected by the baleful calamity chi. Next, Luo Fan knew why Xianwen had said that it would be fine as long as Luo Fan did not find it boring. This was because in the next 10 days, Luo Fan had indeed found it rather boring. During these 10 days, the scene in the hall had not changed at all. Xianwen had been making arrangements, and the elders had sent out their orders as rays of light. During this process, although Xuanwen's many orders allowed Luo Fan to roughly see the state of the various countries when they were united, there were over 800 countries. Luo Fan was rather interested in a few, but once the number increased, there would naturally be some repetition. Of course, it would not be able to attract much of Luo Fan's interest. 10 days later, when it was time to prepare, Xianwen finally stopped giving orders and sent out a message as two rays of light. At this moment, Luo Fan could feel the savage beast spirit array trembling slightly. It received the two rays of light and threw them into two locations that were quite far away from each other. After a while, another two rays of light appeared out of nowhere in the hall and arrived in front of Xianwen. Xianwen pointed at the two rays of light, and they turned into two figures. One was a golden armored deity that Luo Fan had never seen before. His strength was about the same as Xuanwen's, and he even seemed to slightly surpass him. He looked like a middle-aged man. His appearance was extremely dignified and ferocious. The other was a beautiful woman. Her cultivation level was about the same as Xuanwen's. She wore an apricot yellow robe and gave off a cold and elegant aura. Her eyes seemed lost, but also seemed to contain endless emotions. After the two of them appeared, they nodded at Xianwen and said, "The number of countries has been confirmed, and the location has been confirmed. Let's begin." After saying that, the two figures shuddered and turned into countless tiny specks of light that scattered in all directions. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. Xianwen casually pointed forward, and the space in the hall naturally distorted. In the blink of an eye, a lifelike map appeared. This map, with a single glance, Luo Fan knew that it was one of the regions on the island. There were several thousand sealed regions outlined with various lines, and these regions were dyed with 3 different colors. Among them, the largest, more than 800 sealed regions were dyed with a faint green color. The remaining 1,200 or so regions were split into two. One was dyed gold. The other was dyed with a color that seemed to be a mix of all the colors, but also seemed to have no color at all. Anyone would know what this scene represented with a single glance. This map did not look like an ordinary map. Instead, it looked like a scene that someone would see when looking down at the ground from the sky. There were even densely packed figures moving about on it. After the map appeared, Xianwen remained silent and sat quietly on the main seat. The elders began to send rays of light into the map. As they sent the rays of light into the map, the areas on the map that were dyed cyan began to shine brightly. After all the elders had sent their rays of light into the map, the light began to shine brightly. The green regions were all lit up. Luo Fan watched the changes quietly. After sensing it slightly, he knew that this was not an ordinary map. This map was actually a formation. It was a formation that was closely connected to the countries shown on the map and could send orders to those countries. In other words, any changes that occurred on the map could be directly transmitted to the various countries. So, it's a remote control. It's cruel indeed. Luo Fan concluded the formation. Among the countries shown on the map, there were at least hundreds of millions of people. Some even had billions or even tens of billions of people. Such a large number of people were sent to the battlefield in the blink of an eye. They were then killed and erased. How cruel was this? However, even though it was cruel, Luo Fan had no intention of expressing his opinion. After all, compared to what he had done in the past, this kind of cruelty was nothing. One had to know that back in that universe where he was like a saint, he had wiped out an entire galaxy with a single move. Just how many people were in that galaxy? It was a terrifying number that could be calculated in the trillions. How could Luo Fan, who could do this at will, be moved by a cruel war that involved billions or even hundreds of billions of people? Under the remote control of the elders, the more than 800 countries that were under the control of the Azure Temple began to move. Countless people were sent to the junction of the 3 regions and sent into the cruel war between the 3 regions. They were thrown into the meat grinder and became the sacrifices of the gamble between the Azure Temple, the Een God Society, and the Wuhan Nunnery. On the map, the junction between the 3 regions began to change. The originally smooth lines began to have more and more twists and turns, or rather, more and more bumps and bumps appeared. It seemed as if the boundary of the 3 regions on the map began to come to life. Gradually, it began to move randomly on the map. Sometimes it swam in the direction of the Azure Temple, and sometimes it swam in the direction of the other 2 regions. This was the main change of the map in the next few months. At first glance, such a scene seemed very interesting. However, Luo Fan knew that every change in the boundary represented the death of hundreds of thousands, millions, or even tens of millions of people. Obviously, this was something that everyone in the palace knew very well. It was not just the Luo Fan. However, even though they were aware of this, no one in the hall was moved by this. Everyone was only nervous about the change in the boundary, and not a single one of them felt sentimental for the hundreds of thousands of ordinary people who were sent to their deaths under their control. This process lasted for several months, and the calamity chi in the palace grew for several months. In the end, the calamity chi in the palace was hundreds or even thousands of times thicker than before. It had even reached the point where it could be seen with the naked eye. Chapter 1232. Apart from the map in the center, the distribution of the calamity chi on the bodies of the surrounding elders was quite different. Luo Fan secretly identified it and found out that the cultivators whose decisions had caused the deaths of more living beings had more calamity chi around their bodies. On the contrary, those who had caused the deaths of fewer living beings had less calamity chi around their bodies. However, no matter how many there were, even the cultivators whose decisions had not caused the deaths of any living beings had a faint calamity chi around their bodies. Among them, although the calamity chi around Xian one was not as dense as the calamity chi around the map in the center, it was denser and more terrifying than the calamity chi around any of the elders present. Obviously, Luo Fan was not the only one who could see the calamity chi. Every single one of the cultivators present could sense the presence of the baleful tribulation chi. Some of the elders would use some special methods to isolate the influence of the calamity chi on them when they were controlling the war. On the other hand, some of the elders would try their best to guide the calamity chi into their bodies as if they were cultivating a special method with the help of the calamity chi. Xian was one of the cultivators who guided the calamity chi into their bodies. After a few months of development, the prelude to the war seemed to have been completed. Soon, the war entered the most intense stage. The changes in the map in the center were many times faster than at the beginning. In just a few days, dozens of countries in the area belonging to the Azure Temple on the map have been engulfed by the other countries belonging to the Yin God Society and the Wuan Nunnery. The area that was dyed green had been reduced by almost 1/10 in just a few days. Compared to the previous few months, when both sides fought back and forth, the final result was that neither side lost much. It was countless times faster. However, although the Azure Temple had lost 1/10 of its country in just a few days, the expressions of Xian Wen and the others did not change at all. It seemed that it was not the Azure Temple that had lost 1/10 of its country, but the Yin God Society and the Wuan Nunnery. Soon, Luo Fan knew why they were so calm. Because, unknowingly, in the core area of the Wuyin Temple and the Yin God sect, which was the center of many countries, several countries were suddenly dyed green. Obviously, these countries had somehow fallen under the control of the Azure Temple. At this time, he actually changed his tune. They had become the forces of the Azure Temple. Amidst this change, the attacks of the Yin God cult and the Wuan Nunnery suddenly stopped. Originally, they could have completely gained the upper hand. The battle on the battlefield between the three sides almost instantly fell into a disadvantageous position. At this moment, the numerous soldiers actually fell into a state of retreat. When this happened, joy finally appeared on Xianwen and the others' faces. "It's finally here. That was really close," Xianwen mumbled from above. The change of the countries in the core area of the countries controlled by the Yin God cult and the Wuan Nunnery obviously had a huge impact on both sides. After all, it was a change that almost resembled a rebellion in their heartland. For the two great sects that had invested all their strength in the battlefield between the three worlds, even if they were prepared for the rebellion that appeared in their heartland, they would not be able to resist the countries that had already made strict preparations. Therefore, in the following month, the strength of those few countries grew rapidly, expanding the territory of the Azure Temple from the original few countries to hundreds of countries, forming a stable territory in each of the two regions. Although the two forces tried their best to strangle the Azure Temple and bring it back under their control, it was impossible for them to do so. Due to the appearance of the local forces in the core area, the two sects at the border naturally could not care too much about the situation on the battlefield between the three sides. In this way, the countries controlled by the Azure Temple gradually gained the upper hand and gradually recovered the countries that had been swallowed. They even counterattacked, causing the countries controlled by the God cult and the Wuan nunnery to gradually decrease. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that the result was already out. Unless there was a huge accident, the victory of the Azure Temple should be inevitable. The development of the matter was just as Luo Fan expected. After a few months, which was almost 11 months after the start of the battle, the result of the battle was finally out. The Temple of Azure, on the other hand, had a complete victory. Although they had reduced the population of more than 800 countries to 1% and almost destroyed the civilizations of more than 800 countries to the point where they were tens of thousands of years ago. In the end, they had occupied all the countries and defeated the many countries controlled by the God sect and the Wuyin Temple. They had obtained the final victory. When the last country was destroyed and the entire map was dyed green, Xianwen could not help but let out a long sigh of relief, and a joyful expression appeared on his face. At the same time, many of the elders present also let out sighs of relief. They were all extremely happy. At this moment, the ominous tribulation chi in the hall was so dense that it had almost completely concealed everything in the hall. The dark red color completely changed the appearance of everything that originally existed in the palace. Everything seemed to have turned dark red. As for the map in the center, it had turned into a dark red color that looked like it could drip blood. It looked like it was made of solidified blood. Apart from the map, Xuanwen's entire body had also turned dark red, as if he was covered in blood. That was one of the prices they had to pay to win the battle. One must know that in this battle, there were more than 2,000 countries participating in the battle. Each of the countries had at least 1 billion people, and the most had tens of billions of people. The total number of people involved in such countries could only be calculated in the trillions. And in this gambling fight, more than 99% of the living beings in the 2,000 countries had died because of the war, which was also because of the cultivators present. It was easy to figure out how many people had died. The calamity chi produced by the death of so many people did not condense into a substance and really trigger the wrath of heaven. This was already considered very lenient in the demon realm. It was normal for it to condense into such a shocking state. At this moment, the void shook. 2 rays of light directly penetrated the void and appeared in the palace. Then, the 2 rays of light condensed into a man and a woman. They were the same as the sect masters and the abbess of the God cult and the Wuan nunnery whom Luo Fan had seen at the beginning. After the 2 of them appeared, they both looked at Xianwen expressionlessly. For a long time, the sect master of the God cult said, "You're good. You actually planned it long ago. No wonder you chose that place to carry out the battle. This time, we're 1 step behind. You win." As he spoke, he couldn't be bothered to stay here any longer. With a shake of his body, he disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he had taken back the image of the message. However, the woman did not retreat immediately. Instead, she floated in the air and said to Xianwen, "Your plan this time has reminded us. You have to be careful in the next battle. This time you win. We won't disturb you with what you're going to do." As she spoke, her body also collapsed and turned into tiny light spots that scattered everywhere. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. Seeing that they had disappeared, Xianwen sighed. "You planted the seeds there long ago and were ready to overthrow the imperial court at any time. You want to change the emperor and the national master under your control. Such a plan is really amazing." Luo Fan sighed and said, "I'm a little regretful now. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong." Xianwen sighed and said, "Huh." Luo Fan only chuckled and did not make any comments. He did not want to comfort Xianwen either. He knew what Xianwen was worried about. What Xianwen was worried about was that his actions this time would break the rather peaceful tacit understanding that the three great sects had built up over the years. This kind of behavior of planting the seeds of rebellion in the other country and finally triggering the seeds at the critical moment, thus reversing the situation, was naturally natural for ordinary battles. However, for the three sects that were almost one, it was a little too much. To be honest, this kind of behavior was not very complicated. If Xianwen could think of it, then the Yin God cult and the Wuan nunnery should be able to think of it too. However, this kind of behavior was really too bad. Once this kind of method was used and such a situation was set, it meant that from now on, there would be no more scruples. From now on, because of the battle, there would no longer be any restrictions on any means. Therefore, before this, even if the three sects did not specifically say it out, they definitely had a tacit understanding not to use this kind of method. Now that Xianwen had started to use this kind of method, it was equivalent to opening a Pandora's box. After Xianwen secretly sighed, he focused his mind again. Since he had already done it, there was naturally no need to regret it. With a slight thought, an extremely strong suction force was produced from his body. The unimaginably rich calamity chi that filled the interior of the palace was sucked into his body crazily. As the suction force appeared from his body, the extremely dense aura of calamity in the hall formed a vortex. It began to surge madly into Xianwen's body, causing the scene in the hall to gradually change. The dark red color gradually receded, and the hall's original color gradually became visible. This process continued for a few hours before all the baleful tribulation chi in the entire palace was completely absorbed by Xianwen, and the original appearance of the palace was revealed once more. Regardless of whether it was the baleful tribulation chi around Xianwen, the map, or the elders, all of it had vanished. After washing away so much calamity chi, Xuanwen's body gradually emitted an inexplicable calamity chi. This calamity chi kept surging, causing Xuanwen's eyes to gradually turn red. It was as if even he could not control such a rich calamity chi. Xianwen closed his eyes, and the power in his body surged endlessly. Occasionally, a trace of a powerful aura leaked out, and all sorts of strange worlds appeared in the void. They existed in the void for a long time before collapsing and disappearing. This lasted for an hour. After that, all the abnormalities on Xuanwen's body disappeared. He completely returned to normal. Congratulations, fellow Taoist. Luo Fan looked at Xianwen. He said with a smile. However, he could tell that at this moment, Xuanwen's cultivation had improved quite a bit compared to before. Although he still did not truly become a false saint, he was much closer to that realm. Perhaps Xianwen still needed tens of thousands of years of cultivation to become a false saint after refining the Azure Temple into a false saint treasure. But now, he definitely did not need to waste that time. He might only need a few thousand years, or even a few hundred years, or even a few decades. He might even be able to become a level 1 false saint in an even shorter time. That was why he could tell. Only then did Luo Fan congratulate him. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Xianwen smiled and said, "It's just a little harvest. Compared to fellow Taoist, I'm still very far away." Luo Fan chuckled. He did not respond to Xuanwen's probing words. At this moment, many of the elders came forward to congratulate Xianwen for his great improvement in cultivation. After a series of greetings, Xianwen suggested to Luo Fan that they should immediately head to the Azure Secret Realm to do what they had agreed on before. Luo Fan did not do anything in these 11 months. He only watched from the side. Cultivation and strength. His mentality was at its peak. Naturally, he did not care about this. He immediately agreed. The passageway to the Azure Secret Realm had been prepared 11 months ago. At this moment, there was naturally no need for any preparations. Then, Xianwen informed the many elders and flew up with Luo Fan, leaving the palace. Outside the palace, there was not much difference from 11 months ago. It was still as lively as before. There were still many cultivators doing the same things as before. It was as if they did not know that in these 11 months, trillions of people had died in a war somewhere on this island. That was normal. That war was indescribably tragic to those countries. But to this island, it was nothing. This island was just too big. There were tens of thousands of countries. With so many countries, a war involving only 2,000 countries, no matter how tragic it was, what was the big deal? To those who were not around the countries where the war was happening, it did not affect their lives at all. Not to mention to the cultivators in the center of the island, within the savage beast spiritual formation. Of course, it did not affect their lives at all. The passage to the green sky mystery realm was not within the wild beast spiritual formation. This was a matter of course. If it was within the savage beast spiritual formation, how could it be a secret to the other two sects? The three sects each controlled a portion of the savage beast spiritual formation. If the other two sects had any secrets within the formation, no matter how deep they hid, some traces would definitely be revealed. It was impossible to really keep it a secret, and the Azure Secret Realm was too important to the Azure Temple. It was so important that the Azure Temple was willing to start a bet to hide its existence. How could they set up the entrance within the formation? Xianwen brought Luo Fan to an extremely huge cave. The surrounding restrictions were beyond imagination. There were even countless restrictions that isolated the inside and outside of the cave. He carefully made many hand seals, revealing a tunnel that could only allow a person to enter. Then, he entered the cave with Luo Fan. The outside of the cave looked like an island with mountains and water. However, upon entering the cave, one would discover that the cave was like a void. There was only a platform in the center of the void. Xianwen brought Luo Fan to the platform and said to Luo Fan, "This is a teleportation array. However, it does not directly lead to the Azure Secret Realm. Instead, it leads to the entrance of the tunnel to the Azure Secret Realm." Luo Fan nodded to show that he understood. He gestured for Xianwen to ignore him and activate the teleportation array according to plan. Xianwen followed his advice and immediately channeled a golden energy into the platform below. In an instant, the platform lit up and countless rules appeared around the platform. They were densely packed like fine silk and covered the platform from all directions. The scenery around the platform was completely covered and could not be seen clearly. Then, these rules and laws shook violently. The surrounding space-time quickly twisted, folded, shattered, reconstructed, and restored. The rules and laws quickly disappeared, and in the blink of an eye, the scenery outside was revealed. So the entrance is at the bottom of the sea. It's really well hidden. Luo Fan looked around and could not help but smile. It's not that we hid the entrance here, but that the entrance was here all along. Back then, one of the patriarchs of our sect came here for some reason and coincidentally discovered a small world. Because of the special nature of this small world, the patriarchs constructed a tunnel here and fixed the entrance to the small world. That was how it became our sect's exclusive arcane realm. Xianwen listened to Luo Fan and smiled. At that moment, they were still on the same platform. Chapter 1233. Under the illumination of the light from the platform, in front of the platform, which was also the direction that Luo Fan and Xianwen were facing, a whirlpool formed by seawater appeared. The whirlpool looked extremely ordinary, as if it was an underwater whirlpool that occasionally appeared in the sea. It was difficult to see anything abnormal about it. However, Luo Fan could tell at a glance that this whirlpool was definitely the entrance to the so-called Azure Mystery Realm. This was because he could clearly sense that this vortex had distorted the laws of the demon world. Inside the vortex, there was a strange hole in the laws of the demon world. It was a place of nothingness that was neither too big nor too small. Such an existence clearly matched the state of the passageway leading to another world. "It's there." Luo Fan pointed at the whirlpool and said to Xianwen, "You have a good eye. It's there." Xianwen smiled. At this moment, since they were already here, there was naturally no need to delay. Xianwen immediately gathered his strength, and a golden light emitted from within his body. This light was bright and dazzling, even directly suppressing the green light emitted from the platform, causing the surrounding environment to be dyed gold. However, it no longer returned to its original green appearance. As this change occurred, Xianwen raised his hand and made a few hand seals. Countless runes flashed and appeared as he made these hand seals. Then these countless runes formed a torrent and rushed forward, directly pouring into the whirlpool in front of them. As the runes poured in, the entrance of the whirlpool-like passage instantly turned golden. Then, a staircase appeared from the center of the whirlpool, directly in front of Luo Fan and Xianwen. This staircase only had 9 steps, but it looked exactly the same from the outside. It was fundamentally different from the staircase that Luo Fan had seen in the Azure Mystery Realm. "My friend, please," Xianwen said, and took the lead to step onto the staircase. Seeing his actions, Luo Fan knew that he had purposely stepped forward to dispel his doubts. A faint smile appeared on his face. He didn't think that Xianwen had any tricks up his sleeve that could plot against him. One must know that Luo Fan currently had a level 9 pseudo Sage-level artifact with him. Only those who could control the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage would be able to pose a threat to him. And apparently, if he had grasped the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage, wouldn't Xianwen be able to crush him directly? Why would there be a need for schemes? Because of this consideration, Luo Fan wasn't worried at all at this moment. Of course, the 9 steps weren't long. Luo Fan and Xianwen entered the vortex. At this moment, countless passageways formed by strange colors appeared around Luo Fan. In the tunnel, time and space seemed to have lost their meaning. The two of them seemed to be thinking about an inconceivable and strange time. Luo Fan was quite familiar with such a state. It was the space-time tunnel that he had used to enter the demon realm from the other universe. It had a similar characteristic. Of course, the space-time passageway that you passed through before was much more difficult and profound than this passageway. It was also much more mysterious. The impact it had on him was also many times greater. Back then, he had even needed to borrow the heavenly cauldron of the divine court to perfectly guarantee his safety. At this moment, he didn't even need to use any special means to protect himself in this tunnel. His body alone was completely unaffected by the tunnel. Xianwen didn't have it as easy as Luo Fan. In this tunnel, he still needed to emit countless rays of golden light to envelop his body in order to safely pass through. As he looked at Luo Fan, who seemed to be having fun, joy and admiration flashed in his eyes. He was happy because the stronger Luo Fan was, the more likely it was for him to succeed in what he wanted to do. What he admired was naturally because Luo Fan's cultivation level wasn't much higher than his, but he was able to do something that only someone who was many times stronger than him could do. The tunnel wasn't long. In Luo Fan's senses, only a few hours had passed. The light in front of the tunnel changed, and a completely normal world appeared in front of him. This world was a world with a round sky and a square earth. The entire world was filled with the aura of the demon realm. Although it was much thinner than the real demon realm, it was still rather dense. The entire world was vast and boundless. In the sky, there was a starry sky that only the demon realm possessed. At this moment, it was nighttime in this world. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and endless moonlight poured down from the moon, enveloping the entire world. There was only one continent in this world, and there were no humans on this continent. There were only all sorts of beasts and birds that had cultivation and cultivation. They were definitely not ordinary. The place where Luo Fan and Xianwen had appeared was in the void. Looking down, the entire continent was reflected in their eyes. The terrain of this continent was not much different from that of an ordinary continent, but the vegetation was many times more lush than that of an ordinary continent. The entire continent looked like a boundless and incomparably lush forest. Luo Fan suddenly made a sound of surprise. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air. Countless strange liquids were extracted from the air, condensing into a fist-sized ball of liquid in his hand. Could this be the Emperor essence? He looked at the fist-sized ball of liquid and could not help but reveal an expression of shock. This ball of liquid was filled with boundless vitality. It also contained an extremely profound wolf fragment within it. If a drop of this liquid entered the body of an ordinary creature, it would naturally cause the creature to flourish with vitality and gain intelligence. It would directly surpass the limits of its species and become a true monster. This kind of liquid was formed from moonlight. Clearly, only the legendary Emperor essence was the most similar. As expected, I cannot hide it from you. That's right, this is the legendary Emperor essence. It is precisely because this world can condense Emperor essence almost every night. This is why the elders of our sect care so much about this world. Xianwen looked at Luo Fan and discovered the mysteries of this world with a single glance. He could not help but sigh and speak. Luo Fan faintly smiled. The hand that held the ball of Emperor essence shook slightly. In an instant, the ball of Emperor essence completely evaporated, leaving behind only a thin, invisible fragment in his hand. This was none other than the will fragment that had fused with the ball of Emperor essence. As he casually pinched this fragment, all the information contained within the fragment instantly unfolded in front of Luo Fan's eyes. This was a fragment of the evolution of the broken world. This fragment of the evolution of the world. It was from the perspective of the bright moon in the sky. From the position of the bright moon, it overlooked the entire world, experiencing the many specific development processes of the world. How the earth was born, how the mountains were raised, how the weather and climate were formed. How birth, old age, sickness, and death appeared. How it flowed, all sorts of things. It was enough for any person with ordinary intelligence to comprehend all sorts of cultivation methods, and thus have a deeper understanding of the truth of the world. Luo Fan sensed this information. A look of understanding appeared on his face. What he suddenly understood was not only the principle of the Emperor essence being able to turn ordinary beasts into monsters, but also why the Azure Temple had to fuse the will of the world into the half-step pseudo-sage treasure, the Azure Temple. Every night, the moon in the sky would cast down the Emperor essence and fuse the various evolution processes of the world that the moon had observed for countless years into it. This completely showed how powerful the will of the world was. Rather than saying that these will fragments were the will fragments of the moon, it would be better to say that they were the projections of the will of the world. After all, the moon was also a part of the world, and the will on the moon was naturally a part of the will of the world. The will fragments of the moon that had fused with the Emperor essence were, of course, the projections of the will of the world. The projection of the will of the world had flooded to such a degree. For hundreds of millions of years, every night, the fragments of the will would be integrated into the Emperor essence and poured down, covering the entire world, benefiting all living beings between the heavens and the earth. It was easy to imagine how powerful the will of the world was. According to Luo Fan's calculations, the will of the world in such a world might be more than 10 times stronger than the will of the world in a normal world of this scale. Only in this way could the will of the world reach such a level and be able to casually spread everywhere. The half-step pseudo-sage treasure was obviously more powerful with the will of the world integrated into it. Therefore, it was natural for the ancestors of the Azure Temple to set their goal on this world. Your ancestor is lucky, and your sect is even luckier. Luo Fan exclaimed in admiration. He casually patted the will fragment and instantly dispersed it. His hands became empty as he exclaimed in admiration. Xianwen smiled faintly and said, "It is indeed good luck." What kind of existence was he? How could he not know what Luo Fan meant? Is it the will of the world in this world? Luo Fan smiled and shook his head as he asked Xianwen. "Yes, I will have to trouble you." Xianwen nodded. At this time, he looked a little nervous. He had paid a great price for this moment, and this matter was related to the rise and fall of the Azure Temple itself. At this critical juncture, it was naturally difficult for him to suppress his nervousness. How could he still maintain the calm expression on his face? When Luo Fan heard this, he did not immediately say what Xianwen wanted to hear or was not willing to hear. He just silently sensed the world. At this time, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had reached the level of the exceptional Tao master, and he was a flawless, exceptional Tao master. His perception was so strong that even the average level 4 or level 5 pseudo-sage could not compare to him. Although this world was vast and boundless, it really wasn't that big to him. With just a thought, the entire world was completely included in his senses. At this moment, Xianwen only felt that Luo Fan, who was beside him, seemed to have released some kind of inconceivable existence. In a trance, he even felt that all of his secrets, all of his desires, were instantly seen clearly by Luo Fan, and he could no longer hide anything. How could he be so powerful? Such a shocking thought flashed in Xianwen's mind. He had never felt such a powerful perception and such a terrifying feeling, even from some of the false saints he had encountered in his travels in the past. He had never felt such a terrible feeling. Did I really find a treasure this time? Could it be that this fellow Taoist Luo Fan is even more powerful than the pseudo-sages I met before? Xianwen was surprised and happy at the same time, and could hardly control himself. Suddenly, an even more incredible change occurred. Xianwen vaguely found that in the depths of his soul, there seemed to be a strange imprint that was trying hard to condense. But there seemed to be a special mechanism that prevented the imprint from condensing, so that the imprint could only condense a shadow, a prototype, every time. Then it completely collapsed. It turned into tiny fragments and disappeared without a trace. After a while, he would continue the previous process, continuously condensing and continuously shattering. At this moment, Xianwen's mouth gaped. He looked at Luo Fan with reverence in his eyes. He didn't know what this change meant, but he knew. Such a change was definitely caused by Luo Fan in front of him. Moreover, it was caused by the perception that Luo Fan released at this moment. This kind of perception could almost condense some kind of imprint in the depths of the soul of an existence whose cultivation realm had almost reached the level of a pseudo-sage. This kind of power was something he had never even imagined. Now that it had appeared on him, he could only fantasize that this kind of thing could only happen when he was facing a sage. Therefore, it was easy to imagine how shocked Xianwen was right now, and how high his estimation of Luo Fan's strength was. In this state, Xianwen suddenly felt extremely lucky. He felt lucky that he was able to survive until now after fighting with Luo Fan, and he felt even more lucky that he had brought up those two conditions in exchange for the answer to that question. At the same time, he no longer had any doubts about Luo Fan's identity. Only a world with a sage could possibly nurture such a powerful existence within Xianwen's spirit soul. There was that imprint that was suddenly taking shape and then suddenly dispersing. Luo Fan suddenly and gradually sensed an inexplicable connection that suddenly appeared and then suddenly disappeared. At the same time, strands of thoughts belonging to Xianwen were transmitted to his mind through this connection. After thinking for a moment, Luo Fan understood what was going on. But because he was currently using his senses to sense the entire world, Xianwen could sense something extraordinary about him. Xianwen could sense his perfect and unobstructed nature, and from there, Xianwen naturally received the endless mysteries of cultivation that belonged to him. Under normal circumstances, without the robe he had refined to block the inside and outside of his body, Xianwen's perception alone would have been enough to let Xianwen directly form the imprint that belonged to Luo Fan. However, at this moment, the robe was still stubbornly working, stubbornly isolating the inside from the outside. This prevented Luo Fan's perception from perfectly displaying the mysteries of his perception. As a result, Xianwen was unable to perfectly receive all of Luo Fan's past cultivation achievements contained in his perception. It was precisely because of this that the imprint in the depths of Xianwen's spirit could not take form at all. However, even if it could not truly take form, the imprint's embryonic form would appear from time to time. As a result, Luo Fan could intermittently sense Xianwen's thoughts. As he sensed the intermittent thoughts that were transmitted to him, Luo Fan did not know whether to laugh or cry. Just this alone has convinced them of my identity. If I had known earlier, I would have blocked the effects of the robe and directly cast the imprint into the depths of their spirits. That way, I would have been able to avoid that pointless battle back then. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. After discovering that none of Xian Wen's many thoughts were harmful to him, Luo Fan relaxed and began to carefully sense the world, carefully searching for the location of the world's will. Every heaven and earth, every universe, and every world had its own will. This kind of will was also the will of the world. This kind of willpower was not the kind of willpower that ordinary people understood. This kind of willpower indeed had spiritual intelligence and wisdom. However, this kind of intelligence and intelligence was completely different from the intelligence and intelligence that ordinary living beings understood. It was also something that ordinary living beings could not understand, much less communicate with. In other words, although the will of the world had intelligence and intelligence, this kind of intelligence and the way it operated was like it did not have intelligence and intelligence to ordinary living beings or even cultivators. It was something that they could not understand at all. According to Luo Fan's deductions, if one wanted to truly understand and communicate with the will of the world, one would need to obtain a chaotic origin Dao fruit at the very least and become a supreme saint. Luo Fan had experienced the path of transcendence and arrived at this point in time from the age of chaos billions of years in the future. During this period, he had seen hundreds and thousands of wills of the world. He was extremely experienced in finding the existence of the will of the world. In addition, the will of the world that he was currently in was so powerful that it even fused fragments of the will into Emperor Essence through the moon every night and scattered them everywhere. With these various conveniences, Luo Fan very quickly found clues about the location of the will of the world. Chapter 12:34. As he spoke, Luo Fan raised his hand and made a grabbing motion in the void. In an instant, the laws of this world trembled inexplicably. The trembling continued to spread and swept through every inch of the void in this world. In the blink of an eye, it had swept through the world billions of times. In the end, the trembling suddenly broke through the restrictions of the laws of this world and went deep into an incomparably mysterious place. It was a place that was hidden outside the laws of this world, hidden outside the laws of this world, hidden outside the laws of this world, hidden outside the laws of this world. Luo Fan followed the location where the trembling gathered. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure instantly broke through the layers of obstacles and arrived at a place that was extremely mysterious. Time and space were in an inexplicable and mysterious state. In this place, because time and space were extremely mysterious, the surrounding light and shadow were completely different from normal heaven and earth. This world looked like an abstract, extremely distorted void that could not be understood with normal thinking and logic. Stepping into this place was like stepping into the dream of a person with an extremely chaotic mind. That kind of strangeness, that kind of incomprehensibility made one's heart involuntarily tremble. In the midst of such an abstract, dreamlike light and shadow, there was an existence with an indescribable form and color. This existence seemed to be illusory yet real at the same time. It floated in the midst of the abstract light and shadow like a motionless dead object, yet it also seemed to be extremely active. It was as if there were billions of living beings using their strongest methods to move about within it. Luo Fan looked at the strange existence in front of him, and a faint smile appeared on his face. As expected, it's here. Fellow Taoist, you actually found the location of the worlds so quickly. It's really admirable. At this moment, Xian Wen, who had followed Luo Fan here, looked around curiously. An inexplicable expression of admiration appeared on his face. Although the cultivators of the Azure Temple had always wanted to completely extract the world's will from this world to refine a treasure that was also called the Azure Temple. However, this did not mean that they were extremely familiar with the location of the world's will. In fact, Xinwen himself was unable to find a way to enter the location where the will of the world resided. He had cultivated for such a long period of time, but he had never personally stepped into this location. At this moment, If it wasn't for the fact that Luo Fan didn't conceal his tracks, Luo Fan wouldn't have been able to find him. When he stepped into this mysterious place, he left behind many marks in the world, allowing Xianwen to follow behind Luo Fan based on these marks. This time, it would definitely be difficult for him to step into this place as well. Therefore, this was the first time Xianwen saw this strange place with his own eyes. It was also the first time he saw the existence of the world will. That was why Xianwen looked so curious at this moment. It's just an advantage brought about by my rich experience. Luo Fan said with a smile, "This will is so powerful. Do you have any way to extract it?" Xianwen carefully observed the will of the world for a long time, and finally asked with a headache. The will of heaven and earth was the will of heaven and earth. One could well imagine how powerful such a will was. Xianwen looked at the existence of the will of heaven and earth from here. He could already feel a peerlessly powerful aura pressing down on him. It made him feel as if his thoughts were thousands of times slower than before. Any thought that appeared, or even manifested, became hundreds of times more difficult than usual. Looking at this will, Xianwen felt an indescribable sense of shock in his heart, and he even felt that he was so tiny. Trying to move this will was like an ant trying to shake a tree. It was a negative mentality that would never succeed. Luo Fan glanced at Xianwen and said indifferently, "Of course there's a way." The will of heaven and earth exerted an extremely shocking pressure on Xianwen. He even felt that the circulation of his will was shackled, making it difficult for him to truly think. It was even difficult for him to move his thoughts. However, this was nothing to Luo Fan. He had encountered far too many wills of heaven and earth on the path of transcendence. He was already completely used to the pressure that these wills brought to ordinary living beings. At this moment, although the world will of this world was stronger than ordinary worlds, to him, it was like a spring breeze caressing his face. It couldn't move him at all, and it couldn't affect his spirit, will, and everything else in his body that was already flawless and unhindered. However, even though it wouldn't affect him much, Luo Fan didn't care about how hard it was for Xianwen. He glanced at him and answered Xianwen's doubts. Then, he turned his attention back to the will of heaven and earth in front of him. The will of heaven and earth was an extremely mysterious existence. He was the product of the invisible will of all things in the world. In itself, he shouldn't have a real body, but an abstract existence. At that moment, the reason why the will of heaven and earth could condense into such a form in front of Luo Fan was because Luo Fan had changed his perspective. He had arrived at a place where he could overlook the entire world from a macroscopic perspective, as well as a place where he could look down on the world abstractly. In other words, the will of heaven and earth that had condensed in front of Luo Fan was actually the world itself, which was where the Azure Mystery Realm of the Azure Temple was located. If one wanted to completely extract the will of heaven and earth, it was equivalent to extracting the sliver of will contained in everything in the world, from tall mountains to tiny grains of dust in the void. One could imagine how difficult this was. It was precisely because of this difficulty that the Azure Temple had been stuck at this stage for so long, unable to break through. In the end, Xianwen had to ask Luo Fan for help. The real will of heaven and earth is indeed different from the will of heaven and earth in the era projection. Luo Fan looked at the vast will of heaven and earth and could not help but think to himself. After all, the era projection was only a projection. Although it contained the will of heaven and earth, it was only a projection. Since it was a projection, it was naturally different from the real one. It was somewhat deformed. Therefore, the real will of heaven and earth was quite different from what Luo Fan had seen in the era projection on the path of transcendence. Fortunately, there was not much difference in essence, which allowed Luo Fan to easily arrive at this position. He carefully observed the vast will of heaven and earth. Luo Fan carefully thought about how to extract the will of heaven and earth. If the will of heaven and earth is lost, the Azure Mystery Realm will probably lose its most unique imperial essence. Do you think this is a good idea? Luo Fan looked at it for a while and said to Xianwen, "The Azure Mystery Realm had been controlled by the Azure Temple for hundreds of millions of years. By now, it had become an extremely important part of the Azure Temple. If the will of heaven and earth was lost, then the Azure Temple's most precious and special existence, the Imperial Essence, would completely disappear. This was equivalent to destroying the Azure Mystery Realm that the Azure Temple needed. This price was a bit too high, although Xianwen's thought process was much slower than before. Because his thought process was extremely fast, he was still able to think normally. Naturally, he could communicate with Luo Fan normally. When he heard Luo Fan's words, he sighed and said, "This point. Regarding this, our sex ancestors have already instructed us that once we can extract the will of heaven and earth from the Azure Mystery Realm, there is no need to hesitate at all. Moreover, once the Azure Temple becomes a pseudo-divine treasure, the benefits will be 1,000 times better than this Azure Mystery Realm that is not moving. There is no need to hesitate at all about what to choose. Since you have already made up your mind, then that's good. The will of heaven and earth here is different from the will of heaven and earth that I have seen before. I need some time to think before I can complete the task of extracting the will of heaven and earth." Luo Fan said to Xianwen, "Since you need time to think, then I won't disturb you any longer. The pressure from the will of heaven and earth here is too great for me." Xianwen heard and shook his head. He smiled. As he spoke, he bowed to Luo Fan. His body slowly became illusory and disappeared without a trace in a short while. This place was not a normal space-time. If he wanted to leave this place, he naturally did not need to turn around or fly like normal space-time. He only needed to think, and this strange place would naturally expel him out, allowing him to leave this place naturally. Seeing that Xianwen had left, Luo Fan smiled and took a light step forward. His body disappeared in an extremely strange manner and immediately appeared above the will of heaven and earth. His feet directly came into contact with the will of heaven and earth. The moment his feet came into contact with the will of heaven and earth, an indescribable strange feeling surged into his body from his feet. In an instant, he felt as if he had become this part of the world. Endless memories erupted in his heart, making him feel as if he had experienced billions of years in a trance. He had personally witnessed the evolution of this world from zero, and in the end, it gradually evolved into this boundless and vast space-time in front of him. As the boundless memories and information flowed from his feet into his body, he felt as if he was in a trance. In a trance, the feeling he had at the last moment in the universe where he obtained a fragment of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court gradually emerged in his heart. This feeling was as if he was almost omnipotent in this heaven and earth, almost omniscient and omniscient. He was simply a supreme, wonderful feeling like a saint. As he had this feeling, he could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. With a slight movement of his heart, the endless information and memories that were crazily pouring into his feet froze in an instant. Then, the information and memories appeared in his mind as if they were his own memories, allowing him to easily receive the vast and infinite information that could almost destroy any cultivator. Of course, although this information felt almost the same as his own memories, it was only almost, after all. Although he had endless memories, his will wasn't affected by the additional information. The appearance of the memories and information felt like a library that was billions of times larger than any living creature's imagination had appeared in his mind. It could allow him to obtain endless information with a single thought, but it would not affect his mind. After completely accepting the information, Luo Fan instantly threw it to the back of his mind. Although the information contained unbelievable profundities and contained the details of the evolution of the world since the beginning of the world's evolution until now, the perspective they used was one that normal living beings couldn't understand. It was a completely open perspective that observed everything in the heaven and earth, even the slightest thing, from countless perspectives. Such a perspective, it was simply too difficult for normal living beings to comprehend it. It was the same for Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan, who did not have too many extravagant desires for these memories, was not interested in caring about them at this time. Moreover, at this moment, Luo Fan was almost omnipotent in this green sky secret realm. He knew everything, and there was nothing that he did not know. If he wanted to know anything, he could do it with a thought. He did not need to obtain it from these information at all. Are we going to fall out with each other? Suddenly, a playful smile appeared on Luo Fan's face as he thought to himself. Then, he pulled his hand, and a light screen appeared in front of him. This light screen showed a platform at the bottom of the sea. Looking at the appearance of this platform, it was clearly the platform where the entrance of the Green Sky Secret Realm was located. At this moment, on this platform, there were more than a dozen figures floating in the air. These figures were separated into two sides. One side was made up of men, and the other side was made up of women. The leaders of these two sides were people that Luo Fan was familiar with. One was the Heavenly General, and the other was Liao Yuan. It should be here. The Heavenly General frowned as he looked at the whirlpool outside the platform. He asked a man beside him who looked a little short, wore silver armor, looked quite capable, and had a strong aura. That's right. According to the tracking of the formation, their destination must be here. The man who was being questioned said in a hoarse voice, "What we are doing is against the rules, right?" At this moment, Liao Yuan laughed and said, "It is indeed against the rules. But didn't they start it?" The Heavenly General said, "I like that." Liao Yuan nodded. As they spoke, the two of them looked at each other and smiled, but there was an inexplicable killing intent in their eyes. "We have found the location. Next, it's your turn to enter." The Heavenly General said, "That's right." This was obviously an agreement. Liao Yuan did not say much, and only smiled and agreed. After agreeing, she ordered the few women behind her. Then, together with a few of them, they kept forming countless hand seals. The power in their bodies kept surging, and countless runes emerged. They began to quickly condense between Liao Yuan's hands, causing a mass of runes to appear between Liao Yuan's hands, becoming larger and more complicated. "You dare to violate the rules?" At this moment, a cold voice was heard. This cold voice contained incredible power, directly shaking the boundless seawater around it. And in the blink of an eye, an area of nothingness that was getting bigger and bigger appeared. After a while, when the aftermath of the cold voice completely disappeared, the surrounding seawater filled up the area, and the surroundings returned to normal. Of course, during this process, the terrifying impact caused the light emitted by the platform to shake continuously, as if it was about to completely collapse. Rules? Sect leader Xuanwen's words are too laughable. Since you can break the rules of the battle, what right do you have to talk to us about rules? The Heavenly General said indifferently. As he spoke, he raised his hand and punched upwards. When this punch was thrown, endless golden light gushed out, directly splitting the surrounding void into pieces. In an instant, the rules and laws layer underwent extremely subtle changes. Indistinctive Tao sounds could be faintly heard in the surroundings. It seemed as if the battle that was about to happen in this area had become a movie with the Heavenly General as the main character. The golden light that gushed out of the fist directly condensed into a golden-armored deity in the void and slammed upwards. At this moment, a huge golden palm condensed from heaven and earth pressed down from above and collided with the golden-armored deity condensed from the golden light. This collision produced a strange wave that swept in all directions. It directly tore apart the various strange phenomena caused by the changes in the rules and laws layer, and completely smoothed out the various subtle changes in the rules and laws layer. Then, the golden-armored deity was completely engulfed by the huge golden palm and disappeared without a trace, as if he had never appeared. As a result, the golden palm had also suffered quite a bit of damage, becoming much thinner than when it first appeared. With one look, one could tell just how much damage the giant golden-armored deity had caused to it. However, even so, the golden palm did not withdraw. Instead, it continued to press downwards, wanting to completely crush Heavenly General, Liao Yuan, and the others. If there was only een heavenly general present, the palm would definitely be able to complete this process easily. Unfortunately, there were more than a dozen powerful cultivators present at this moment. Among them, all of them were at the peak of the sage-to-be realm. Even if they were much weaker than Xianwen, they were still existences of the same level. How could they be wiped out by this greatly weakened palm without any resistance? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to the starting point to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to M to read it. T. Chapter 1235. At this moment, a magic treasure of different shapes appeared above the heads of all the people from the Een God sect. There were all kinds of magic treasures. One of them was in the shape of square brick. There were also bottles, mirrors, and so on. There were all kinds of magic treasures. These magic treasures came in all sorts of shapes and forms, so naturally, their functions were also varied. Some magic treasures directly changed the void, changing the laws and laws. Some magic treasures even affected time, causing time to be disrupted. Some shook space, causing all sorts of unimaginable power to surge towards the palm up above. Although its power had been greatly reduced, it was still extremely powerful. It was an extremely impressive palm. Under the resistance of the magic treasures, the golden palm collapsed with a loud bang. It directly turned into countless golden fragments that scattered in all directions, gradually disappearing into the void. At that moment, a golden figure appeared in front of the vortex. He looked at the Een Divine General and the others with an ugly expression. This shining figure had the appearance of Xianwen, but he wasn't the real Xianwen. He was just an incarnation of the golden power in Xianwen that had merged with the power of the world. Although such an existence was slightly weaker than his main body, it had fused with a part of the world after all. Thus, it still had its own uses. Its defensive capabilities were not inferior to his main body. It was because this incarnation had such power that Xianwen sent this incarnation here the moment he sensed the change. He wanted to stop everyone from invading the sky-green mystery realm. Xuanwen's incarnation was full of anger at that moment. Our three sects have been in alliance for billions of years. Do you really want to turn against us now? Xuanwen's incarnation said, while suppressing his anger. The reason our three sects can form such a stable alliance is because the strength of the three sects is similar. If the difference in strength is too great, then this kind of alliance can't be stable. I think you can see it clearly. An immortal general said. At that moment, the many women on Liao Yuan's side were continuously condensing runes and gathering them between Yuan's hands. Naturally, they didn't have the chance to talk to Xianwen. Under such circumstances, the responsibility of communicating with Xianwen naturally fell on Een Divine General. So, Xianwen asked, "Your actions this time have already violated the most fundamental line. Do you dare to say that you're not here to refine your half-refined pseudo-sage treasure into a real pseudo-sage treasure?" Een Divine General said coldly. I see. Xianwen finally came to a realization. It turned out that he had thought too simply. Just like how he knew many of the secrets of the Een God cult and the Wuan nunnery, the biggest secret of the Azure Temple. However, the two sects knew it very well. Based on his performance these days, they only needed to make a slight deduction, and they would naturally know why he and Luo Fan wanted to do this time. The ancients did not lie to me when I was blinded by greed. At this moment, this was the only thought in Xianwen's mind. Normally, how could he not have thought of this? How could he not know that his various actions might cause others to think of his motives? But in the entire year before that, Yi Zichen had been gone. Due to the hope of surpassing Luo Fan, he did not think of this at all. He only thought that his actions were sufficiently secretive and would not be found out by the other two sections. After thinking of this, Xianwen realized that his mind had suddenly returned to the clear and thorough state a year ago. All sorts of thoughts and deductions kept flashing in his mind. After that, his face became even uglier. Where are the invisible sect leader and the Wuan nunnery master? Could it be that they are now in the mountain gate of our sect? Sect leader Xianwen is indeed worthy of being the disciple of the Azure Sky sect who is most likely to become a pseudo-sage. That's right, our sect leader and the Wuwen Nunnery Master are currently visiting your sect. If not, how could we come here to visit sect leader Xianwen without worry? God Cult smiled faintly. Xianwen naturally knew what he meant by visit the moment he heard this. He was the most powerful person in the Azure Sky Temple. Apart from him, although there were many elders who were on par with him, and there were many defensive formations, they could only resist one of the sects between the God Cult and the Wuwen Nunnery. Of course, this kind of resistance was only used when one of the two sects attacked. It did not mean that after losing Xianwen, they would not be able to defend against it. The strength of the Azure Sky Temple could still be on par with one of the two sections. Under normal circumstances, this kind of defense was obviously enough. This was also the consideration that Xianwen had when he brought Luo Fan into the Azure Sky Temple alone. However, if such a power encountered the combined strength of the God Cult and the Wuwen Nunnery, the result would definitely be a tragedy. Thinking about this clearly, Xianwen suddenly became anxious. Although he was still in the war-torn sea, he was no longer near that island. Instead, he was at a place extremely far away from that island. It could be said that he was already at the edge of the chaotic sea. At such a distance, Xianwen would not be able to sense the situation inside the Wild Bee spiritual formation unless he used the platform that was occupied by Divine General and the others. Naturally, he would not know how much damage the Azure Sky Temple had suffered. Therefore, his expression became increasingly grave. Moreover, the power in his body began to fluctuate violently. The aura of a peak sage-to-be, or even a half-step pseudo-sage, overflowed from his body unreservedly and began to impact the surroundings crazily. Even the vortex behind him shook slightly. This kind of aura was naturally targeted at Divine General and the others who were on the platform because of Xuanwen's intention. Under such an aura, the expressions of Divine General and the others changed slightly. Although they were only slightly weaker than Xianwen in terms of cultivation realm, this slight difference was enough to bring about extremely serious consequences. It was enough to make them unable to withstand the pressure of Xuanwen's aura, causing them to feel that their bodies were affected because of Xuanwen's aura. The circulation of their power was affected. Sect leader Xianwen, you don't have to worry. Our three sects are of the same breath and branch. Although our sect leader and the abbess of Wuwen Nunnery visited your sect did not suffer too much damage. However, it did not affect our harmony. As long as sect leader Xianwen gives up on this plan and does not break the balance of power, our three sects will still be of the same breath and branch. Our three sects are still of the same breath and branch. There won't be any difference from before. Divine General said, of the same breath and branch. Alliance? Xianwen laughed coldly when he heard that. Stopping someone from achieving the Tao is like killing one's parents. Now that you are stopping me from achieving the Tao, do you really think that I can pretend that nothing has happened? At this moment, Xuanwen's body emitted a cold smile. Stopping someone from achieving the Tao is equivalent to killing their parents. At this moment, apart from the extremely dense aura, Xuanwen's body also emitted an extremely powerful killing intent. Although his mind was filled with anger, it was no longer as restless as before. That kind of worry. No matter how selfless or how magnanimous a cultivator was, he was still selfish in nature. Why would a cultivator join a sect and protect a sect? The fundamental reason was that this sect could allow him to cultivate better. It could allow him to have a higher chance of transcending. In other words, it was because the sect could bring him benefits. Under such circumstances, any sect was only a way for cultivators to reach their goal of transcendence. It was not their ultimate goal. At this moment, to Xianwen, the hope of elevating the Azure Temple to the pseudo-sage level and advancing his cultivation realm to the pseudo-sage level was right in front of him. For him to give up this hope for the sake of his own sect, this was equivalent to purposely committing suicide at the last moment to maintain the smoothness of a path. This kind of choice. How could a selfish cultivator do such a thing? Therefore, as for Xianwen, an immortal general suggestion was like a fart. Even if he was out of his mind, even if he was out of his mind, he would definitely not choose it. As expected, it's useless. It seems like the sect leader knows you best. Ian Divine, General sighed. All right, you've already given him the last chance. What are you waiting for? At this moment, Liao Yuan spoke up. Unknowingly, she had already condensed a ball the size of a soccer ball between her hands. There were countless runes on it, evolving into endless changes. It seemed like a ball that contained all the mysteries of the universe. Beside her, many cultivators from the Wuan nunnery had already stopped what they were doing. Each of them looked at Ian Divine General with an indescribable expression. Xianwen frowned when he saw this. He had a bad feeling about this. After all, we've been comrades for hundreds of millions of years. I can't bear to do this. Ian Divine General sighed helplessly at this moment. His face was full of pity. Xuanwen's feeling was getting worse. He shouted softly and raised his hand to draw a line in the void. In an instant, infinite golden light appeared out of nowhere and formed a huge golden temple in the void. It fiercely pressed down on the platform. The focus of this golden temple was not on Ian Divine General, who posed the greatest threat to him. Instead, it was on the side of the Wuan nunnery, who had already condensed the runes to break the restriction of the space-time tunnel. In other words, Liao Yuan and the others. Even though his clone here was extremely powerful and could practically suppress everyone present, it was only a clone in the end. Even if he lost it, it would only cause some damage to Xianwen and cause him to use up some of his power. It posed no threat to his main body at all. Therefore, no matter how strong Ian Divine General and the others were, who were clearly specialized in attacking, they would not pose much threat to him. Even if they were strong enough to instantly wipe out his incarnation, they would not pose much of a threat to him. In contrast, although Liao Yuan and the others did not display such a strong offensive ability, he could clearly feel a strong deciphering intent from the rune ball in her hand. It was very obvious that it would have a great effect on the restriction of the tunnel behind him. It was very likely that it could directly break the restriction of the tunnel and allow them to directly enter the Azure Mystery Realm through this tunnel. They were directly targeting his body. Compared to the Ian Immortal General and the others who could only hurt his incarnation and couldn't harm his body, they were obviously much more threatening. Xianwen was now very rational. He was not blinded by benefits. Naturally, he knew what was important and what was secondary. At this moment, the Ian Immortal General finally used his trump card. He suddenly raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, a completely different golden armored deity appeared above his head out of thin air. This golden armored deity was somewhat similar to the golden armored deity that he had displayed before. However, it had a completely different nature. The golden armored deity from before was just an illusion created by the power of his punch. In essence, it was just an illusion. It was just a special appearance. However, the golden armored deity that appeared above his head was a real, solid entity. In other words, it was a magic treasure in the form of a born Taoism body. A magic treasure that was half a step away from the pseudo-sage level. It was a humanoid magic treasure that was even closer to the pseudo-sage level than the Azure Temple. After this magic treasure appeared, its aura spread out without reservation. It instantly froze time and space within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, condensing the rules and laws within this area. At this moment, it was as if this magic treasure itself was the only living thing that could move within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. It was even something that Xianwen had displayed. The illusion of the Azure Temple also completely froze in midair at this moment. It could not continue to press down. The golden armored deity moved its body slightly. Thunderous sounds came from within its body, directly producing a strange wave that could be seen with the naked eye that swept in all directions. At this moment, the runes on the platform flashed brightly. It was unknown how many runes were shattered in the explosion. It directly collapsed and disappeared without a trace. Such a terrifying sound, such a shocking power, was truly fearsome. It was so powerful that it was shocking and terrifying. The golden armored deity's eyes were extremely lively. A faint smile appeared on its face. Then, it raised its hands and stabbed them upwards, directly into the bottom of the azure temple that was condensed from mysterious runes. Then it suddenly tore it apart. The azure temple was instantly torn into two sides by it. As if it was a physical entity, it rubbed it casually, and the entire thing was completely crushed into tiny spots of light. They were like stars in the sky that floated around its body. At this moment, everything around it was still fixed. Although those specks of light had already collapsed, they were also affected by the solidifying power, so they were unable to completely disappear. They could only remain where the golden armored deity had placed them, which was the reason why such a scene could be seen. The golden armored deity did not care about the golden spots of light around it. He lifted his feet and walked up step by step. He stepped on the void as if he was walking on real stairs. Slowly and leisurely, he walked to the front of Xuanwen's incarnation. Although I admire you for helping Tianqing, I'm just a magic treasure. However, I'm just a magic treasure. I have to listen to my master's words. So I'm sorry. The golden armored deity sighed and said. At this moment, Xianwen heard all of this. After all, his cultivation had reached the half-step pseudo-divinity realm. Although the power of the golden armored deity that could freeze space-time and laws of laws made it difficult for Xianwen to move his body and circulate his power, it could not stop Xuanwen's will from circulating. It could not stop him from sensing the outside world. Naturally, it allowed him to hear this voice. So, it's this magic treasure. If I had known this would happen, I would have attached the Azure Temple to my incarnation. Such a thought flashed through Xuanwen's mind. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the golden armored deity had already slammed his palm on his incarnation. In an instant, his incarnation was sent flying in all directions, completely turning into tiny golden fragments. Even the heaven and earth that had fused with the golden power was completely destroyed by this slap. For Xianwen, the feeling of his incarnation suffering such misfortune was naturally quite unpleasant. His face turned pale, and he suddenly spat out a large mouthful of blood. This is more like an alliance formed by 3 sections. How can there be 3 sects that love each other and form an alliance as one? Through the light screen in front of him, Luo Fan saw everything that had happened in front of the space-time tunnel, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The 3 sects were like 3 countries. Between them, there should have been countless schemes, plots, alliances, and betrayals. Previously, the Azure Temple, the Yin God cult, and the Wuwen Nunnery could only solve their problems by gambling. That was simply too abnormal. Only when the other 2 sects felt that Temple of Azure Temple had the possibility of being above them, and that they might become the vassals of Temple of Azure Temple, would they brazenly turn hostile, directly go to their doorstep to threaten them, and use all means to destroy them. This was how a true alliance should behave. Just as Luo Fan was feeling emotional and Xianwen was vomiting blood, at the entrance of the space-time tunnel, the golden armor deity had already dispersed the power that could freeze space-time and the nomological laws. As he dispersed that power, the specks of light formed from Xuanwen's clone, and the silhouette of the azure sky temple instantly scattered in all directions, stirring up a powerful tremor in the void, even evaporating and sublimating the surrounding seawater by an unknown number of tons. After a long while, when the specks of light completely vanished, the seawater flooded in from the outside world once more, filling up the spot where it had been evaporated and sublimating.